The gavel cracks like a gunshot in courtroom 4B. Judge Clayton Hargrove leans forward, his face twisted with contempt as he stares down at the 17-year-old black teenager standing alone at the defendant's table. "You're just another kid with no future," he spits, his voice dripping with venom that has nothing to do with justice. "Where's your father?" The courtroom gallery snickers. Public defenders shuffle papers, bailiffs smirk. Malik Rivers doesn't flinch. Instead, he reaches into his pocket with deliberate calm, pulls out his phone, and asks the question that will shatter everything. "Your Honor, may I call him?" Before we dive into this story, I want you to stick around until the very end, because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. And when you're done, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning had started with hope. Malik Rivers had barely slept the night before, his mind racing through the presentation he'd rehearsed 100 times. At 6 o'clock a.m., he was already awake in his small bedroom in southeast Washington, D.C., the early summer light filtering through threadbare curtains. His air quality monitoring device sat on his desk like a trophy. Sleek black casing, custom-built sensors, 18 months of work compressed into something smaller than a shoebox, but powerful enough to expose an entire system of environmental injustice. He ran his fingers across its surface one more time, checking connections he'd already checked a dozen times. Inside that unassuming box was data that could change everything. Pollution readings from 43 locations across the city, time-stamped and GPS tagged, showing precisely where the air was poison and where it was clean. The pattern was undeniable. The poor neighborhoods, the black neighborhoods, the immigrant neighborhoods. They were drowning in particulate matter, while the wealthy enclaves breathed easy. Today was the day he'd finally make people listen. "Malik, baby, you need to eat something." His grandmother's voice drifted up the narrow staircase of their row house. Evelyn Rivers had raised him since he was 9, after his mother died, and his father's career had taken him to a world that required constant travel, high-security clearances, and a life that couldn't accommodate a grieving child. She'd done it without complaint, working double shifts as a hospital custodian to keep him fed, clothed, and focused on school. "Coming, Graham?" Malik carefully placed the device into his backpack, nestling it between folders of printed data and his laptop. He'd backed everything up 3 times: cloud storage, external drive, email attachments, but he needed the physical device for the demonstration. The city's Environmental Justice Committee was meeting at 10:02 a.m., and he had a 10-minute speaking slot that could turn into funding, support, maybe even policy change. But first, he had to get through courthouse security. That was the part that made his stomach twist. The committee meeting was being held in the courthouse annex building, which meant passing through the same metal detectors and X-ray machines that processed defendants, lawyers, and witnesses every day. He'd called ahead 3 times to explain what he was bringing, but the security supervisor had been dismissive. "Just bring your ID and your paperwork, son. They'll figure it out when you get here." Malik had a bad feeling about that casual brush-off, but what choice did he have? Downstairs, his grandmother had set out scrambled eggs, toast, and turkey bacon, a feast by their modest standards. She stood by the stove in her hospital scrubs, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her brown eyes sharp with the kind of love that sees everything. "You're nervous," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm fine, Graham." "Malik." She set down her spatula and turned to face him fully. "I've known you your whole life. You chew the inside of your cheek when you're worried. You're doing it right now." He forced himself to stop, managed a smile. "It's a big day, that's all." Evelyn crossed to him, placed both hands on his shoulders. At 17, Malik had shot up to 6 feet tall, but somehow his grandmother still made him feel small in the best way. Protected, seen, loved without condition. "You listen to me," she said softly. "What you've built, what you've discovered, it matters. Those people in that meeting room need to hear what you have to say. But if anything feels wrong, if anyone tries to intimidate you or make you feel less than, you call your father. You hear me?" Malik's jaw tightened. "Dad's busy. He's always busy." "Marcus loves you. He's just saving the country." "I know." The bitterness leaked through despite his best efforts. His father was U.S. Attorney General Marcus Rivers, the first black man to hold the position,
a figure whose face appeared on news broadcasts and Senate hearing footage more often than it appeared in Malik's life. They talked once a week if he was lucky, always brief conversations squeezed between meetings and flights. Evelyn cupped his face. "Baby, your daddy would drop everything for you. You know that, right?" Malik didn't answer. Instead, he kissed her forehead, grabbed his backpack, and headed for the door. "I'll text you after the presentation." "Malik, love you, Graham." The July heat hit him like a wall the moment he stepped outside. D.C. Summers were brutal, the humidity thick enough to swim through, but Malik barely noticed as he jogged down the front steps and headed toward the bus stop. His neighborhood was already awake, corner stores opening, elderly men setting up folding chairs on stoops, younger kids riding bikes in tight circles. This was Fairmont Heights, a historically black neighborhood that the city had systematically neglected for decades. It was also one of the 43 locations where Malik's monitors had recorded air quality levels that violated EPA standards by massive margins. The bus ride downtown took 40 minutes, giving Malik time to review his notes one final time. He'd structured his presentation carefully. Start with the human impact: kids with asthma, elderly residents with respiratory disease. Then hit them with the data, then finish with the solution. His device wasn't just documentation, it was a blueprint for accountability. If the city installed monitors in every at-risk neighborhood, they'd have real-time evidence of violations, proof that could force polluters to clean up or shut down. Simple, undeniable, powerful. The courthouse complex loomed ahead, a massive brutalist structure that housed both the criminal courts and various city administrative offices. Malik got off 2 stops early, wanting to walk the last few blocks to calm his nerves. He passed food trucks setting up for the lunch rush, lawyers in expensive suits talking on phones, and a growing line of people waiting to pass through security. That's when he saw the news vans. 3 of them, parked along Constitution Avenue with satellite dishes extended. Reporters stood in clusters, checking equipment and talking to producers. Malik felt a flutter of excitement. Maybe someone had gotten word about the Environmental Justice Committee meeting. Maybe there'd be press coverage of his presentation. He joined the security line at 9:15 a.m., 45 minutes before his speaking slot. The line moved slowly, people removing belts and shoes, placing bags on conveyor belts. When Malik's turn came, he lifted his backpack onto the X-ray machine and stepped through the metal detector. The machine beeped. "Step to the side, please." The security guard was a heavy-set white man with a bored expression. "Empty your pockets." Malik pulled out his phone, his wallet, a handful of change. The guard waved a handheld detector over him, and it squealed near his waistband, his belt buckle. Standard procedure. But when Malik moved to collect his backpack from the conveyor belt, another guard was already pulling it aside. "This your bag?" The second guard was younger, black, his expression more alert. "Yes, sir." "What's this?" He pointed at the monitor on the X-ray screen, where Malik's device showed up as a dense cluster of components, wires, circuit boards, sensors. "It's an air quality monitoring device. I'm presenting it to the Environmental Justice Committee this morning." Malik kept his voice calm, respectful. He'd practiced this explanation. "I called ahead to let security know I'd be bringing it." The guard exchanged glances with his partner. "Wait here." They carried his backpack to a side table and began unpacking it, roughly, without care. Folders spilled open, paper scattered. Malik's laptop was set aside, and then they lifted out the device itself, turning it over in their hands like it was something dangerous. "Sir, please be careful with that. It's delicate equipment." "You built this?" The first guard's tone had shifted, suspicion hardening into something uglier. "Yes, sir. It's for a school project that turned into community research." "Looks like a bomb to me." The words dropped like stones. Malik's heart kicked into high gear. "It's not a bomb. It's environmental monitoring equipment. There's documentation right there in the folder." "Step back." "Sir, if you'll just let me explain." "I said step back." Other people in line were staring now. Malik felt heat crawling up his neck, a familiar cocktail of anger and fear that every black teenager learned to swallow. He raised his hands slightly, making himself non-threatening, and took 2 steps backward. That's when he heard the voice from across the lobby. "What seems to be the problem here?" The voice was deep, authoritative, carrying the kind of weight that made people straighten their spines. Malik turned and saw a man in a dark suit walking toward the security checkpoint, late 50s, white, with iron gray hair and the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled. He moved like he owned the building, and maybe he did. Judge Clayton Hargrove. Malik didn't know his name yet, didn't know his reputation, but he could feel the shift in the room, the way the guards suddenly stood straighter, the way conversations dropped off. Your Honor. The first guard's demeanor changed entirely. Just a routine security check. This individual was attempting to bring suspicious equipment into the building. Suspicious? Judge Hargrove approached the table, examined the device with cold eyes. What is this? It's an air quality monitor, Your Honor. Malik kept his voice level. I'm scheduled to present to the Environmental Justice Committee at 10 o'clock. This is part of my presentation. The judge's gaze slid to Malik, taking in everything, his age, his skin, his secondhand blazer, and carefully maintained composure. Something flickered in those pale eyes, something that made Malik's stomach drop. Environmental Justice Committee, Judge Hargrove repeated slowly. And you built this device yourself? Yes, sir. Interesting. The judge picked up one of Malik's folders, flipped through the pages of data. These readings are from locations all over the city? Yes, sir. 43 monitoring sites over 18 months. Unsupervised? Malik hesitated. I worked with my physics teacher and a graduate student from Georgetown who... So you've been placing unregistered electronic devices throughout the city without permits or official oversight? The judge's tone remained mild, but there was steel underneath. Collecting data on private and public property? The devices were placed in public spaces with community permission. Community permission, Judge Hargrove smiled thinly. Not legal permission, not city authorization. He turned to the security guards. Confiscate this equipment, all of it. Malik's blood went cold. Your Honor, you can't do that. I have permission to present. This is a security matter now. The device, the laptop, all documentation. It stays here pending a full review. The judge's eyes locked on Malik with something that looked like satisfaction. And I think we need to have a conversation about proper legal procedures, don't we? I haven't broken any laws. Courtroom 4B, 10 minutes. Judge Hargrove nodded to the guards. Bring him up. It happened so fast that Malik barely had time to process it. The guards packed his device, carelessly, jamming components together, into an evidence bag. His laptop went into another bag. His folders were stacked and carried away. And then hands were on his arms, not rough, but firm, guiding him toward an elevator. Wait, my presentation. The committee meeting. Malik tried to pull free, but the grip tightened. You'll have to reschedule, son, one of the guards said, almost apologetically. On what grounds? I haven't done anything wrong. No one answered. The elevator doors closed, and Malik watched the lobby disappear, taking with it 18 months of work, his one chance to make a difference, and any illusion that the system was interested in listening to someone like him. Courtroom 4B was smaller than Malik expected, with dark wood paneling and rows of empty benches. A handful of people occupied the gallery. Public defenders sorting files, a court reporter setting up her equipment, a few attorneys in whispered conversation. At the front, elevated on his bench like a king on a throne, sat Judge Clayton Hargrove. Malik was directed to stand at the defendant's table. State your name for the record, the judge said. Malik Rivers, Your Honor. He kept his voice steady despite the tremor trying to work its way through. But I'd like to know why I'm here. I haven't been charged with anything. You brought unauthorized electronic equipment into a government building. You've been conducting unsupervised research without proper permits. That's sufficient cause for inquiry. Judge Hargrove leaned back in his chair, studying Malik with open disdain. How old are you? 17, sir. 17. The judge shook his head slowly. And where are your parents? Did they drop you off here thinking you could play scientist for the day? The words stung more than they should have. My grandmother raised me. She's at work. And this isn't plain... Where's your father? The question hung in the air. Malik felt every eye in the courtroom turn toward him, waiting for the answer they expected. Absent, unknown, another statistic. He's traveling for work, Malik said quietly. Judge Hargrove's smile was cruel. Of course he is. Let me guess, you don't know where he is? Don't have a way to contact him? Probably haven't seen him in months? Something hot and sharp twisted in Malik's chest. The judge was trying to humiliate him, trying to make him small. And the worst part was that some of it was true. His father was absent. His father did prioritize work over everything else, but not for the reasons this man assumed. I can contact him, Malik said. I'm sure you can. The judge's tone dripped with condescension. Listen, son, I see kids like you every single day. Bright enough to get into trouble, not smart enough to understand consequences. You think you're special because you can wire some circuits together? You think that entitles you to bypass laws, regulations, proper procedures? Your Honor, I followed every guideline. You followed nothing. The judge's voice cracked like a whip. You placed unregistered devices around the city. You collected data without authorization, and then you tried to waltz into a government building with equipment that could be used for anything: surveillance, sabotage. It's an AIR quality monitor. The words burst out of Malik before he could stop them. It measures particulate matter, ozone levels, volatile organic compounds. That's it. The only thing it's dangerous to is the companies that are poisoning people. The courtroom went silent. Judge Hargrove stood slowly, his face flushing red. You just raised your voice to a sitting judge. Malik's heart hammered, but he didn't back down. I'm sorry for my tone, Your Honor, but this is wrong. I have a right to present my research. The Environmental Justice Committee is expecting me. The committee has been notified that you won't be attending due to security concerns. The judge descended from the bench, walking toward Malik with measured steps. Let me make something very clear to you. You're just another kid with no future, no guidance, no real prospects. You want to know why your neighborhoods are full of pollution? Because people like you don't follow rules, you don't respect authority. You think you're owed something just for existing. Each word was designed to wound, to diminish. Malik felt them landing like punches, but he refused to let his face show it. He thought about his grandmother working night shifts, about the kids in his neighborhood with inhalers, about every time someone had told him he didn't belong, didn't matter, wasn't enough. And he thought about his father, thousands of miles away, fighting battles Malik barely understood, carrying the weight of a country on his shoulders. Judge Hargrove was right about one thing. Malik did think he was owed something. He was owed the chance to breathe clean air, to present evidence, to be treated like his work mattered, to be treated like he mattered. The judge stopped inches from Malik's face. Where's your father? He asked again, slower this time, making each word an insult. Malik looked him dead in the eye. May I call him, Your Honor? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Judge Hargrove's face. Excuse me? You asked where my father is. I'd like to call him, if the court permits. The judge's eyes narrowed. This wasn't the response he'd expected. Most kids would have crumbled by now, would have been crying or angry or defeated. But Malik stood straight, his hand already moving toward his pocket where the guards had returned his phone. You want to call your father? The judge's voice dripped skepticism. Right now, in my courtroom. Yes, Your Honor, Judge Hargrove laughed, a short, ugly sound. By all means, call him. Let's see if he even picks up. Malik pulled out his phone with steady hands. The courtroom watched as he scrolled through his contacts, past friends, past his grandmother, past teachers and research partners, until he reached the entry simply labeled Dad. He'd called this number exactly 3 times in the past 6 months. His father always called him, scheduled around meetings, brief check-ins that felt more like duty than connection. Malik never initiated contact because he'd learned early that his father's world didn't have room for interruptions. But his grandmother's words echoed, Your daddy would drop everything for you. Malik hit dial and raised the phone to his ear. The courtroom was so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Judge Hargrove's smirk widened. Voicemail? 4 rings. 5. Malik's throat tightened. Maybe his father was in a meeting. Maybe he was on another call. Maybe... The line clicked. Malik? His father's voice was sharp with immediate concern. What's wrong?
Those 3 words nearly broke him. Not hello, not I'm busy. Just instant, focused attention. The kind of attention Malik had convinced himself his father didn't have for him. Dad? Malik's voice cracked slightly. I need help. Where are you? In the background, Malik could hear movement, a door closing, voices fading. Courthouse complex, downtown, courtroom 4B. Who's with you? A judge, security. They confiscated my research project and put me on speaker now. Malik lowered the phone, his hand shaking just enough to notice. He looked at Judge Hargrove, whose expression had shifted from smugness to something more cautious. Your Honor, my father would like to speak with you. The judge waved dismissively. I don't have time for… Speaker. Phone, Malik interrupted quietly, and the authority in his own voice surprised him. He pressed the speaker button. His father's voice filled the courtroom, calm, professional, carrying the kind of power that didn't need volume. This is Marcus Rivers. To whom am I speaking? Judge Hargrove's face went gray. The transformation was instant and absolute. The cruel judge who'd been berating a teenager vanished, replaced by a man who suddenly understood he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Judge Clayton Hargrove, Your Honor. This is highly irregular. My son told me his research equipment was confiscated. On what grounds? We had security concerns about… It was a device with electronic components. Standard procedure. The judge was actually stammering now, his earlier confidence evaporating. I want to speak with your head of security. Now! Sir, I don't think that's… I'm not asking, Judge Hargrove. Marcus Rivers' voice dropped to a temperature that could freeze blood. You have 60 seconds to get security on this call, or I'm making a different call, to the Chief Justice of the D.C. Circuit. One of the bailiffs was already moving, practically running toward the door. The public defenders in the gallery had gone still, everyone suddenly understanding they were witnessing something extraordinary. Malik stood at the defendant's table, phone in hand, watching Judge Hargrove's world crumble in real time. The judge reached for his own phone with trembling fingers, dialing security. This is Judge Hargrove. I need the head of security in courtroom 4B immediately. It's urgent. Less than 3 minutes later, the courtroom door opened. The security supervisor, a black woman in her 50s with captain's bars on her uniform, entered looking confused and concerned. Your Honor, I was told… You're on speaker with Marcus Rivers, Judge Hargrove said, his voice barely above a whisper. The captain's eyes went wide. Mr. Attorney General? Captain? Marcus Rivers' tone softened slightly, but lost none of its steel. My son arrived at your facility this morning to present research to the Environmental Justice Committee. He brought an air quality monitoring device, scientific equipment, properly documented. It was confiscated, and he was detained. I need a full explanation. The captain's gaze shot to Malik, then to the judge, her expression shifting through shock, understanding, and something close to anger. Sir, I was not informed of any detention. If your son contacted our office ahead of time as he stated, he did, Marcus confirmed, 3 times. Then this should never have escalated beyond a standard inspection. The captain's voice had gone professional, clipped. Judge Hargrove, did you order this young man's equipment confiscated? The judge looked like he wanted to disappear. There were concerns about… The device appeared. It's an air quality monitor, Marcus Rivers said, each word precise as a scalpel. Built by a 17-year-old honor student who's been documenting environmental violations in underserved communities. The documentation is extensive, the research is legitimate, and my son had every right to present his findings to a city committee. The captain turned to Judge Hargrove with an expression that promised consequences. Your Honor, I need to retrieve this equipment immediately. Of course. Yes, absolutely. Judge Hargrove nodded rapidly. It's being held in the evidence room downstairs. Then let's go get it, the captain gestured to Malik. Son, you're coming with me. Mr. Attorney General, I'm personally ensuring your son's property is returned undamaged and that he makes his scheduled presentation. Thank you, Captain. Marcus Rivers paused. Judge Hargrove? The judge flinched like he'd been struck. Yes, sir? Clear your docket. I'll be there at 9 o'clock a.m. tomorrow. The line went dead. The silence in courtroom 4B was deafening. Judge Hargrove stood frozen, his face the color of old newspaper. The bailiffs wouldn't meet his eyes. The public defenders were already whispering to each other, phones emerging from pockets to spread the news. Malik followed the security captain out of the courtroom, his legs shaking with adrenaline and relief, and something else he couldn't quite name. As they walked down the corridor, the captain glanced at him. "Your father is Marcus Rivers, the Attorney General." "Yes, ma'am." "And you didn't think to mention that?" Malik's throat tightened. "I wanted my work to matter on its own, not because of who my father is." The captain stopped walking, turned to face him fully. Her expression softened. "Your work does matter, Mr. Rivers. What happened in there had nothing to do with your research, and everything to do with a man who saw a young black kid and made assumptions he had no right to make." She resumed walking. "But I'm glad you called your father, because what Judge Hargrove did was wrong, and it's about time someone held him accountable." They took the elevator down to the evidence room where Malik's equipment was being held. The captain personally oversaw the return of every piece, the device still intact, the laptop, the folders of data. She even found packing materials to protect the monitor properly. "The Environmental Justice Committee meeting starts in 20 minutes, she said, checking her watch. "The annex building is 3 minutes away. I'm walking you there myself." "Thank you," Malik managed. "Don't thank me. Just go in there and blow their minds." They emerged back into the main lobby, where news vans were still parked outside and the morning rush had intensified. People stared as Malik walked past with the security captain as an escort, his backpack now properly packed and protected. The Environmental Justice Committee met in a conference room with tall windows overlooking Constitution Avenue. 15 people sat around a large table: city council members, environmental lawyers, community organizers, a few academics. They looked up as Malik entered, their conversations trailing off. "Mr. Rivers," a black woman in her 40s with natural hair and sharp eyes stood. "I'm Council Member Diane Patterson. We were worried you weren't coming." "I'm here," Malik's voice came out stronger than he felt. "I'm ready to present." "We heard there was some kind of security issue. It's been resolved." The captain gave Malik an encouraging nod, then stepped back to position herself by the door. Malik approached the front of the room, setting his backpack on the table. His hands were still trembling slightly, but as he unpacked his device, carefully, reverently, something settled in his chest. He'd come this far. He'd survived a judge's contempt, security harassment, and the very real fear that everything he'd worked for would be erased. But his device was intact, his data was intact, and he finally had an audience that might actually listen. "Good morning," he began, and his voice didn't shake. "My name is Malik Rivers, and for the past 18 months, I've been documenting air quality violations across Washington, D.C. What I found is proof that our city is systematically poisoning its most vulnerable residents." He powered on his device, connected it to the room's display screen via his laptop, and watched as his data bloomed across the wall, color-coded maps showing pollution levels that painted the city in shades of injustice. The red zones are neighborhoods where air quality exceeds EPA limits by factors of 2, 3, sometimes 4 times the allowable threshold. The green zones are areas that meet or exceed federal standards. Malik let the image speak for itself, the stark divide between wealth and poverty, white and black, power and powerlessness. "Notice anything?" Silence filled the room. Then Councilmember Patterson spoke quietly. "The red zones are all in Ward 7 and Ward 8, Southeast D.C., east of the river." "Exactly." Malik advanced the slide. "Now, let me show you where the major polluters are located: industrial sites, waste management facilities, highway corridors with known emissions problems." Another map appeared, overlaying the pollution data with facility locations. The correlation was undeniable. "And here's the real kicker," Malik continued, his confidence building with every passing second. "This map shows EPA enforcement actions over the past 5 years." A third layer appeared, and it was almost entirely blank in the neighborhoods that needed it most. Where wealthy areas had seen regular inspections and citations, the red zones had been virtually ignored. Someone in the room swore softly. Malik spent the next 40 minutes walking them through his methodology, his data collection process, The statistical analysis that proved this wasn't coincidence or bad luck, it was policy. It was choice. It was the kind of structural violence that killed people slowly and called it acceptable losses. He showed them hospital admission rates for asthma and respiratory disease, overlaid with his pollution maps. Perfect correlation. He showed them property values declining in direct proportion to air quality degradation. He showed them demographic data that made the racism impossible to deny. Communities of color breathing poison while white neighborhoods breathed clean. When he finished, the room sat in stunned silence. Then Council Member Patterson began to clap, slow, deliberate, building. Others joined. Within seconds, the entire committee was applauding, and Malik felt something crack open in his chest that he hadn't known was closed. "Mr. Rivers," Patterson said, "this is extraordinary work. How would you feel about expanding this project citywide with official support and funding?" Malik opened his mouth to respond, and his phone buzzed. A text from his grandmother. "Call me. Now." He excused himself, stepped into the hallway where the security captain still waited, and dialed. "Graham, is everything okay?" "Baby, where are you?" Her voice was tight with worry. "At the presentation. It went well, really well. Malik, something's happening. The news is running a story about a judge and the attorney general's son. They're saying there was an incident at the courthouse. Are you all right?" Malik's stomach dropped. "I'm fine. I'll explain everything when I get home." "Your father called me. He's coming home tonight. He said—" Her voice broke slightly. "He said he should have been there, that he's sorry." Tears stung Malik's eyes. "Graham, he loves you so much, baby. I know it doesn't always feel like it, but he does." "I know." And for the first time in a long time, Malik actually believed it. He returned to the conference room, where Council Member Patterson was already drafting an emergency resolution to install monitors across the city. Other committee members were on phones, calling colleagues, setting up meetings. The momentum was building, finally building, after 18 months of feeling like he was shouting into the void. But even as Malik answered questions and accepted congratulations, part of his mind was back in Courtroom 4B, watching Judge Hargrove's face as he realized exactly who he'd just tried to humiliate. His father had said he'd be at the courthouse tomorrow at 9 a.m. Malik had a feeling that visit was going to change more than just one judge's career. Something bigger was in motion now. He could feel it in the way the security captain kept receiving calls, in the way reporters outside were multiplying, in the tension crackling through the courthouse like an approaching storm. He'd come here today to present evidence of environmental injustice. But he'd stumbled into something darker, a system that didn't just ignore pollution violations, but actively protected them. A judge who'd tried to silence a teenager rather than listen to inconvenient truths. And tomorrow, Marcus Rivers, U.S. Attorney General, protector of civil rights, defender of federal law, was going to walk into that courthouse and ask questions nobody had wanted answered. Malik packed up his equipment carefully, accepting business cards and handshakes and promises of support. The security captain walked him back through the courthouse complex, past security checkpoints that now waved him through without question, past courtrooms where whispers followed in his wake. At the main entrance, she stopped. "Mr. Rivers? What Judge Hargrove did, that was unconscionable. But the way you handled yourself in there, the work you've accomplished." She shook her head with something like wonder. "You're going to change things. You already have." Malik nodded, not trusting his voice. Outside, the July heat was oppressive, but Malik barely felt it. He walked to the bus stop, his backpack heavy with equipment and data and evidence that people were finally ready to see. His phone buzzed continuously, texts from classmates who'd seen the news, messages from his grandmother, a missed call from his father. He'd call back later. Right now, he just needed to breathe. The bus arrived, and Malik climbed aboard, finding a seat by the window. As they pulled away from the courthouse complex, he watched the building recede in the distance. That monument to justice that had tried to crush him and failed. Tomorrow, his father would walk through those doors. Tomorrow, whatever Judge Hargrove had been trying to hide would be dragged into daylight. Tomorrow, the real questions would begin. But today Malik had won. He'd stood in front of a committee and presented his truth, backed by data so solid it couldn't be denied. He'd turned months of solitary work into the beginning of real change. His phone buzzed one more time, a text from his father. "I'm proud of you, son. Always have been. Sorry it took me this long to show it properly." Malik closed his eyes, letting the tears come, letting himself feel everything he'd been holding back. Pride and pain and love and anger all mixed together, complicated and real and human. By the time the bus reached his neighborhood, the tears had dried. Malik Rivers walked home with his head high, carrying equipment that had survived confiscation and data that had survived suppression, knowing that tomorrow would bring a reckoning. The storm was coming, and this time Malik wouldn't be facing it alone. The evening news cycle exploded like a dam breaking. By the time Malik reached home, every major network in the DC area was running some version of the same story. Attorney General's son detained at courthouse. Judge accused of racial profiling. Environmental research confiscated in security incident. His phone had died from the sheer volume of notifications, texts, emails, social media mentions from classmates he hadn't spoken to in years. His grandmother met him at the door, her face carved with worry lines that made her look older than her 68 years. She pulled him into a fierce hug before he could even set down his backpack. "Don't ever scare me like that again," she whispered against his shoulder. "When I saw your face on the television, Malik, I thought something terrible had happened." "I'm okay, Graham. I promise." He held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of cocoa butter and hospital antiseptic that always clung to her scrubs. "It was scary for a while, but Dad," his voice caught. "Dad showed up when I needed him." Evelyn pulled back, cupping his face in her work-roughened hands. Her eyes were bright with tears. "Your father's been calling every 30 minutes. He's on his way home right now. His plane lands at Reagan at 11. Malik's chest tightened. His father never came home without weeks of advance notice. "Tonight? He's coming tonight?" "Said he's cleared his schedule for the next 3 days, baby. What exactly happened in that courthouse?" So Malik told her everything. Judge Hargrove's contempt, the confiscation, the humiliation designed to break him down. His grandmother's expression shifted from worry to fury as he described the judge's questions about his father, the assumption of absence, abandonment, worthlessness. "That man tried to destroy you because of the color of your skin," she said quietly when he finished. "And he had the power to do it, would have done it if you hadn't had protection." "I know." Malik sank onto the worn sofa, exhaustion finally catching up. "But Graham, that's what makes this so messed up. How many other kids stood in front of that judge without protection? How many got crushed because they couldn't make one phone call and change everything?" Evelyn sat beside him, took his hand. "Your father's going to that courthouse tomorrow for exactly that reason. Because you're right, this wasn't just about you. This was about a system that Judge Hargrove thought he could manipulate without consequences." They ordered Chinese takeout and tried to watch a movie, but Malik couldn't focus. His mind kept circling back to the courtroom, to the device that had almost been destroyed, to the 18 months of work that had come so close to vanishing. Around 10:30, he showered and changed into clean clothes, then sat in the living room window watching for headlights. His father's car, a standard black SUV driven by a security detail, pulled up at 11:47 p.m. Malik's heart hammered as he watched Marcus Rivers emerge from the back seat, still wearing a suit despite the late hour, moving with the careful control of a man who'd spent all day holding himself together. Their eyes met through the window, and something passed between them. Recognition, relief, 1,000 unspoken apologies. The front door opened. Marcus stood in the threshold, tall and solid and suddenly looking every one of his 56 years. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Malik crossed the distance in 3 steps and wrapped his arms around his father, and Marcus held him like he was afraid to let go. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice rough. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there." "You were there." Malik's throat was tight. "When I called, you were there." They stood like that for a long time, Evelyn watching from the kitchen doorway with tears streaming down her face. Finally, Marcus pulled back, gripped Malik's shoulders, studied his face with an intensity that bordered on desperate. "Did he hurt you? Did anyone put hands on you?" "No, just words, just trying to make me feel small." Marcus's jaw clenched hard enough that Malik could see the muscle jump. "What Judge Hargrove did was assault, son. Maybe not physical, but assault all the same."
He used his power to terrorize a minor, to confiscate legitimate research, to deny you due process. That's not justice. That's tyranny wearing a robe. What are you going to do? Malik asked. His father's eyes were cold and clear. My job. They sat up until past 2 in the morning, Malik explaining his research in detail, while Marcus listened with absolute focus, occasionally asking sharp questions that proved he understood exactly what his son had uncovered. When Malik showed him the pollution maps on his laptop, Marcus stared at them for a full minute without speaking.
This is federal evidence, he said finally. Environmental Protection Agency violations, civil rights violations. Malik, you've documented systematic discrimination that violates the Clean Air Act and the Equal Protection Clause. He looked at his son with something close to awe. You built a Title VI case without even realizing it. What's Title VI? It prohibits discrimination by any program receiving federal funding. The city gets EPA grants, transportation funds, development money, all federal dollars. If they're allowing pollution to disproportionately harm communities of color while protecting white neighborhoods, that's a federal civil rights violation. Marcus stood, began pacing. Judge Hargrove tried to bury this. The question is why? Maybe he's just racist, Malik said. Probably, but that level of interference, confiscating your research, dragging you into his courtroom, that's not casual prejudice. That's panic. Marcus turned to face him. Someone doesn't want this data public, and they have enough influence to deploy a federal judge as their weapon. That's what I'm going there to find out tomorrow. Malik felt a chill run down his spine. Dad, be careful. If they're willing to go after a kid with a science project, then they've already shown me exactly how dangerous they are. Marcus crouched in front of his son, eye level. You were incredibly brave today, braver than you should have had to be. But this is my world now, and I know how to move through it. Trust me to handle this. I do trust you. Malik met his father's eyes. I don't want to be the reason something bad happens to you. Marcus gripped the back of his son's neck gently. You could never be that reason. You're the reason I do this job in the first place. To build a country where kids like you don't have to be brave just to present scientific research. Where your skin color doesn't determine whether justice protects you or destroys you. His voice dropped. I'm going to make an example of Judge Hargrove, not because of who you are to me, but because of what he represents. A system that thinks it can crush our children and face no consequences. That ends tomorrow. They finally went to bed around 3, but Malik lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of his father moving around the house. It had been so long since Marcus had been home that the creaking floorboards in the hallway felt almost foreign, a reminder of how much distance had grown between them. But distance could be closed. His father had proven that today. Malik must have eventually slept because he woke to sunlight and the smell of his grandmother's pancakes. The kitchen clock read 7:15 a.m. He stumbled downstairs to find Marcus already dressed in a charcoal suit, white shirt, red tie, battle armor for the war he was about to wage. Morning, son. His father poured him orange juice without being asked. How'd you sleep? Not great. You? About the same. Marcus set down his own coffee mug. I've been on the phone since 5. The FBI field office is sending agents to the courthouse this morning. The EPA's Office of Civil Rights is launching an immediate investigation, and I've requested Judge Hargrove's full case history for the past 10 years. Malik's eyes widened. The FBI? Your research documents federal crimes. I'm treating it accordingly. Marcus checked his watch. I need to be there by 8:30 for prep meetings before the 9 o'clock. You're coming with me. What? Dad, I don't think you're coming. His father's tone left no room for argument. This is your research, your work, your story. You deserve to see what happens when the system actually works the way it's supposed to. An hour later, they pulled up to the courthouse complex in an official vehicle escorted by 2 more SUVs. News vans clogged the street. At least a dozen now, reporters and camera operators scrambling for position. The moment Marcus stepped out of the car, they surged forward like a single organism. Mr. Attorney General, can you comment on yesterday's incident? Is it true your son was racially profiled? Are charges being filed against Judge Hargrove? Marcus raised one hand, and somehow the chaos stilled. He moved to a designated spot where microphones bristled, Malik standing slightly behind him, trying not to feel completely overwhelmed by the cameras, the lights, the weight of national attention. Yesterday, my 17-year-old son came to this courthouse to present legitimate scientific research to the city's Environmental Justice Committee, Marcus began, his voice carrying that particular timbre of controlled fury that made even reporters hold their breath. Instead of being treated with the respect his work deserved, he was detained, his research was confiscated, and he was subjected to treatment designed to humiliate and intimidate him. This happened because a federal judge saw a black teenager and made assumptions that had nothing to do with law or justice or evidence. Cameras flashed like strobe lights. Reporters scribbled frantically. What happened to my son happens to young people of color in this country every single day. Most of them don't have the protection he had. Most of them don't have a phone number they can call to make the system suddenly remember it's supposed to serve justice, not prejudice. Marcus's eyes were hard as diamonds. But what makes this case particularly disturbing is what my son was trying to expose. Evidence of systematic environmental discrimination that violates federal law. Someone didn't want that evidence presented. Someone used a federal judge to try and bury it. That kind of corruption doesn't just violate my son's rights. It violates the rights of every person who's been breathing poisoned air while the city looked the other way. Are you suggesting a cover-up? A reporter called out. I'm stating facts. Judge Hargrove's interference went beyond routine security concerns. His actions were calculated to suppress research that documents federal, environmental, and civil rights violations. Today, we're going to find out why. Marcus nodded once. That's all I have right now. He turned, placed a hand on Malik's shoulder, and guided him toward the courthouse entrance. The security checkpoint from yesterday had been transformed. Additional personnel, supervisor oversight, and a palpable tension that made everyone move carefully. The same guards who'd confiscated Malik's equipment now wouldn't meet his eyes. The security captain who'd helped him yesterday, Captain Williams, her nameplate read, was waiting inside. With her stood two people in dark suits with FBI badges clipped to their belts, and a woman in her 40s carrying a leather briefcase embossed with the Department of Justice seal. Mr. Attorney General, Captain Williams extended her hand. Special Agents Morrison and Chen from the D.C. field office, and this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Moss. Handshakes were exchanged. Marcus's demeanor shifted into something Malik had never seen before. Absolute command, the full weight of federal authority focused like a laser. Status? Marcus asked. Agent Morrison, a black man with close-cropped hair and sharp eyes, consulted a tablet. Judge Hargrove arrived at 7:45. He's currently in his chambers with his attorney. Chief Judge Reynolds has cleared Courtroom 4B for our use and suspended Hargrove's docket pending the outcome of this meeting. Security footage? Being compiled. We have cameras covering the main entrance, the security checkpoint, and the courtroom itself from yesterday. Judge Hargrove's case files. Rebecca Moss opened her briefcase, pulled out a thick folder. 10 years of sentencing data, cross-referenced with demographic information and EPA enforcement records in the relevant jurisdictions. Her expression was grim. Sir, the correlations are significant. Marcus took the folder, scanned the first few pages. His face remained neutral, but Malik saw his father's knuckles whiten as he gripped the papers. How significant? Hargrove presides over environmental cases in addition to his criminal docket. Over the past decade, he's dismissed 87% of complaints filed by residents in majority-minority neighborhoods, while ruling for plaintiffs in 73% of cases from affluent areas. When companies are cited for violations in poor communities, his fines average $11,000. Same violations in wealthy neighborhoods? Average fine is $240,000. The silence that followed was deadly. That's not judicial discretion, Marcus said quietly. That's systematic protection of polluters in specific geographic areas. Agent Chen, an Asian woman with steel in her eyes, pulled up something on her tablet, turned it to show Marcus. We also found this. Campaign finance records for Senator Grant Whitmore. Malik saw his father's expression freeze. The Environmental Committee chair. Yes, sir. Whitmore's received over $3 million in donations from companies that operate facilities in the red zones on your son's pollution map. We've cross-referenced those donations with dates of Hargrove's rulings. Every time one of these companies faced serious fines or closure orders, Hargrove reduced penalties or dismissed cases within a 2-month window of Whitmore receiving a major contribution.
Jesus Christ, Rebecca Moss breathed.
He's not just racist, he's bought. Marcus closed the folder carefully, his movements precise and controlled. When he looked up, his eyes were cold enough to frost glass. Captain Williams, please escort Judge Hargrove to Courtroom 4B. His attorney may accompany him. Agent Morrison, I want those security cameras ready to roll. Agent Chen, get the EPA Regional Administrator on the line. I want enforcement teams ready to move the moment I give the word. He turned to Malik. You're going to sit in the gallery. Don't speak unless I ask you a direct question. Understood? Malik nodded, his mouth too dry to answer. They moved through the courthouse like a military operation. Malik was positioned in the front row of the gallery, Captain Williams standing guard nearby. The FBI agents set up video equipment while Rebecca Moss arranged documents on the prosecution table. Marcus stood at the front of the courtroom, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the empty judge's bench with an expression that promised reckoning. The doors opened. Judge Clayton Hargrove entered with a thin, nervous-looking attorney at his side. The judge's arrogance from yesterday had evaporated, replaced by barely concealed fear. His skin had gone gray, and his hands trembled slightly as he took a seat at the defendant's table, the same table where he'd made Malik stand. The reversal wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Marcus waited until everyone was seated, until the silence became unbearable, before he spoke. Judge Hargrove, I'm here in my official capacity as United States Attorney General to discuss your conduct yesterday regarding my son, Malik Rivers. But I think we both know this conversation is going to cover significantly more than one incident. Hargrove's attorney, a man named Rothstein according to his business card, hastily placed on the table, cleared his throat. Mr. Attorney General, my client is willing to apologize for any misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Marcus let the word hang in the air like something rotten. Your client detained a minor without cause, confiscated legitimate research equipment, and subjected that minor to verbal abuse designed to intimidate and humiliate. That's not a misunderstanding, counselor. That's a potential violation of civil rights under color of law, punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison. Hargrove flinched visibly. Marcus continued, his voice never rising but somehow filling every corner of the courtroom. But what concerns me more is why. Why would a federal judge risk his career to suppress a teenager's science project? He opened the folder, pulled out the first document. Unless it wasn't really about the project at all. Unless it was about protecting something, or someone, who didn't want that data becoming public. I have no idea what you're talking about, Hargrove said, but his voice cracked. Let me help clarify. Marcus slid a paper across the table. This is your sentencing record for environmental cases over the past 10 years. Notice anything interesting? Hargrove didn't look at it. His attorney picked it up and his face went pale. You've systematically protected corporate polluters operating in low-income communities while hammering those same companies when they violate regulations in wealthy areas. The statistical probability of this pattern being coincidental is approximately 1 in 4 million. Marcus pulled out another document. Now let's talk about Senator Grant Whitmore, Committee Chair for Environmental Oversight, major recipient of donations from the same companies you've been protecting, companies that are named in my son's research as the primary sources of illegal pollution levels. This is circumstantial, Rothstein started. No, counselor, it's a pattern, and patterns are evidence. Marcus turned to Agent Morrison. Show them the security footage from yesterday. The video played on a large screen. Malik watched himself arrive at the courthouse, saw the security guards examine his device, saw everything escalate when Judge Hargrove inserted himself into the situation. But then the footage continued, following Hargrove after Malik was taken upstairs. The judge went directly to a phone in a private corridor. The video had no audio, but his body language screamed urgency. The call lasted 3 minutes. Immediately after, Hargrove made a second call. Then he walked to the evidence room and personally examined Malik's device and documentation. Who did you call? Marcus asked softly. I don't recall. The FBI pulled your phone records this morning. Judge Hargrove, who did you call?
Silence stretched out. Then Hargrove's attorney leaned in, whispered urgently in his client's ear. The judge's shoulders slumped. I want immunity, Hargrove said. Marcus smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Malik had ever seen. Counselor, your client doesn't seem to understand his position. He's not negotiating from strength here. He's drowning, and I'm the only one who might throw him a rope if he gives me everything I want. Everything? Rothstein's voice was barely a whisper. Names, dates, communications, every backroom deal, every favor traded, every time your client prostituted his judicial authority to protect polluters in exchange for political cover. Marcus leaned forward. Senator Whitmore is the target. Your client is just a useful idiot who got caught. If he cooperates fully, I'll recommend reduced charges. If he doesn't, he'll go down alone while the people who used him walk away clean.
Hargrove looked at his attorney, who gave a tiny, defeated nod. I called Whitmore's chief of staff, Hargrove said, his voice hoarse. I told him there was a kid with pollution data that could blow up the senator's biggest donors. He said to bury it, confiscate everything, find cause to arrest if necessary, just make it go away. The courtroom went silent except for the scratch of Rebecca Moss's pen taking notes. And the second call? Marcus pressed. Back to the chief of staff. I told him I had the device and documentation. He said they'd handle disposal through back channels at EPA, file it as contaminated evidence, claim chain of custody issues, whatever it took. Hargrove's hands were shaking badly now. I was trying to help. Whitmore's been good to this courthouse, good to judges who understand how things work. How things work, Marcus repeated flatly. You mean how a senator and his corporate donors poison poor neighborhoods while judges look the other way in exchange for campaign support and career advancement? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. Marcus straightened. Judge Hargrove, you're suspended from the bench effective immediately. You'll surrender your passport to Agent Morrison within the hour, and you're going to provide the FBI with every communication you've had with Senator Whitmore's office for the past 5 years. And if I cooperate, Hargrove's voice was barely audible, then maybe you spend 2 years in minimum security instead of 10 in a federal penitentiary. Marcus gathered his documents. The rest depends on how useful you make yourself. Agent Morrison will take your formal statement. Marcus turned to leave, then paused, looked back at Hargrove with cold contempt. You tried to destroy my son because you thought he was powerless. You thought you could look at a black teenager and see nothing worth protecting, nothing worth respecting. That's not just corrupt, Judge Hargrove. That's evil. And evil doesn't get to hide behind a robe anymore. He walked out, Malik scrambling to follow, his heart pounding with a mixture of vindication and shock. In the corridor, FBI agents were already moving, some toward Hargrove's chambers, others making phone calls, the machinery of federal justice suddenly in motion. Marcus pulled Malik aside, his professional mask cracking just enough to show the father underneath. You okay? I think so. That was... Dad, you destroyed him. No. He destroyed himself the moment he chose power over principle. Marcus's expression softened. But you stood up when it mattered. You called me when you needed help. And because you did, we're about to take down a corrupt senator and dismantle a system that's been poisoning communities for profit. What happens now? Marcus checked his watch. Now we go to the EPA. Now we make sure your research doesn't just expose the problem. It becomes the foundation for fixing it. And now I spend the next 3 days making up for all the time I should have been here but wasn't. They walked out of the courthouse together, father and son, past reporters still clamoring for statements, past cameras that would beam this story across the country. Malik's phone buzzed with a text from Councilmember Patterson. Watching the news, this is incredible. Committee meeting rescheduled for next week. We want full presentation with federal support. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. Mr. Rivers, this is Dr. Sarah Chen from MIT's Environmental Justice Lab. We'd like to discuss your research and potential scholarship opportunities. Please call when convenient. Malik stared at his phone, unable to process how completely his world had transformed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, he had been a kid with a science project. Now he was evidence in a federal investigation, his work cited by the Attorney General, his story headline news. Overwhelming, his father asked gently. Completely. Marcus put his arm around Malik's shoulders as they approached the waiting SUVs. Then let's go get breakfast somewhere quiet. Just you and me. Everything else can wait a few hours. They ended up at a small diner in Northeast D.C., away from the media circus, where Marcus ordered pancakes and Malik got waffles, and they sat in a corner booth talking about everything except corruption and courtrooms. They talked about Malik's college plans, about the books his father had been reading, about memories of Malik's mother that they rarely shared but needed to remember. She'd be so proud of you, Marcus said quietly, staring into his coffee. Your mom always said you had the soul of a fighter. I didn't understand what she meant until yesterday, watching you refuse to be broken. I wanted to break, Malik admitted. When that judge was tearing into me, I wanted to just disappear. But you didn't. You stood your ground, and then you asked for help. That takes more courage than people realize, knowing when you're in over your head and trusting someone to pull you out. His father's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry I made you feel like you couldn't call me. Like my work was more important than you. Dad, let me say this. Marcus reached across the table, gripped Malik's hand. I chose this job because I believed in justice, in making systems work for everyone instead of just the powerful. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that justice starts at home, with being present for the people you love, with showing up when it matters. He squeezed harder. I'm not going to miss any more of your life, Malik. I promise you that. Malik felt tears spill down his cheeks, didn't bother wiping them away. I need you, Dad. I've always needed you. I know, son. I know. And I'm here now. I'm here. They stayed in that diner for 2 hours, and it felt like the first real conversation they'd had in years. When they finally left, the world outside was still spinning with breaking news about senatorial corruption and judicial misconduct, but inside that moment, Malik felt something shift and settle. A foundation rebuilt. A relationship reclaimed. His father kept his promises. All of them. The EPA's regional headquarters occupied a glass and steel tower in southwest D.C., its lobby filled with environmental impact posters and a massive digital display showing real-time air quality readings from monitoring stations across the mid-Atlantic. Malik stood beside his father in the elevator, watching the numbers climb toward the executive suites on the 14th floor, his stomach tight with anticipation that felt nothing like the fear from yesterday. This was different, electric, purposeful, the sensation of standing at the edge of something that could actually change lives. The elevator doors opened directly into a conference room where a dozen people waited, their conversations dying the moment Marcus Rivers stepped through. Regional Administrator Patricia Gonzalez, a woman in her mid-50s with steel gray hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades fighting bureaucratic battles, stood immediately. Mr. Attorney General, Mr. Rivers. She extended her hand first to Marcus, then to Malik, with the kind of respect that made him stand straighter. Thank you for coming. I've had my team working through the night on your data. What we found is... She paused, searching for the right word. Damning doesn't even begin to cover it. The conference table was covered with printed maps, data sheets, and analysis reports. Malik recognized his own work transformed into official documentation, his hand-drawn charts now rendered in professional graphics that somehow made the injustice even starker. A wall-mounted screen displayed one of his pollution maps overlaid with demographic data, facility locations, and something new, property ownership records. We need to understand the scope, Marcus said, moving to the table. Malik documented 43 monitoring locations over 18 months. How does that correlate with historical enforcement? A younger man with dark circles under his eyes, introduced as Dr. James Reese, the office's environmental justice coordinator, pulled up a presentation on the screen. We went back 15 years. Your son's red zones have had an average of 2 EPA enforcement actions per year across all facilities. The green zones, wealthy, predominantly white neighborhoods, averaged 17 per year. Jesus, someone murmured. It gets worse, Dr. Reese continued, advancing the slide. When violations were cited in the red zones, the average time from citation to resolution was 47 months. In green zones, 8 months. Malik felt his breath catch. He'd known the system was broken, had documented the pollution disparity, but seeing the enforcement failure laid out in stark numbers made the corruption impossible to dismiss as coincidence or bureaucratic inefficiency. This was policy. This was intentional. "Who oversees this region's enforcement priorities?" Marcus asked. Patricia's expression went hard. "Officially, my office. But for the past 8 years, we've had what's called an advisory partnership with the Senate Environmental Committee. They can't directly order us to act or not act, but they control our budget appropriations. When Senator Whitmore's office suggests we deprioritize certain enforcement actions, there's an implicit understanding that non-compliance affects our funding." "That's illegal coercion," Rebecca Moss said from her position near the door. "It's also nearly impossible to prove without documentation of explicit threats. Whitmore's too smart to put anything incriminating in writing." Patricia pulled up another slide, a photograph of a sprawling industrial complex surrounded by residential neighborhoods. "This is Meridian Chemical Processing, one of Whitmore's biggest donors. They operate a waste treatment facility in Ward 8 that's violated air quality standards every quarter for the past 6 years. Your son's data shows particulate levels 3.8 times above EPA limits within a 2-block radius." Malik leaned forward, recognizing the location immediately. "That's near the Langston neighborhood. I have monitoring data from 4 sites around that facility. The readings were consistent across all seasons, way above threshold." "We know," Dr. Reese said quietly. "We've known for 6 years. We've issued citations, levied fines that Meridian pays without blinking, and nothing changes. Every time we prepare to escalate to closure proceedings, Senator Whitmore's office intervenes with budget concerns or regulatory review requests that delay action by months." "Meanwhile, people are breathing poison," Malik said, unable to keep the anger from his voice. "Kids are developing asthma, elderly people are dying from respiratory failure, and everyone just, what? Accepts it?" The silence that followed was heavy with shared guilt. These were EPA employees, environmental professionals who'd chosen this work because they cared, and they'd been systematically neutered by political corruption. "Not anymore," Marcus said, and the steel in his voice made everyone straighten. "Administrator Gonzalez, I'm authorizing immediate enforcement actions under emergency public health provisions. Every facility in those red zones gets inspected within 72 hours. Any violations get escalated to closure proceedings. No delays, no budget considerations, no political interference." Patricia's eyes widened. "Sir, that's 41 separate facilities. We don't have the personnel." "You do now. I'm pulling EPA criminal investigators from 3 other regions. The FBI's Environmental Crimes Unit is standing by. And I'm issuing federal court orders that bypass any local injunctions these companies might try to file." Marcus turned to Rebecca Moss. "Draft the emergency orders. I want them filed by close of business today." Rebecca nodded, already typing on her tablet. "Yes, sir." "What about Senator Whitmore's?" Patricia asked. "The moment we move on these facilities, he's going to know exactly where the pressure's coming from. He'll fight back." "Let him." Marcus's smile was cold. "Judge Hargrove is cooperating with the FBI. He's providing documentation of every conversation he had with Whitmore's office, including instructions to suppress environmental complaints and protect specific donors. The senator doesn't know he's already finished. He just hasn't figured it out yet." Malik watched his father work with something approaching awe. This was Marcus Rivers in his element, not the absent figure who called once a week with apologies, but the Attorney General who could marshal federal resources like a general commanding troops. Orders were issued, teams assembled, legal strategies mapped out with surgical precision. Within 2 hours, the EPA conference room had transformed into an operations center coordinating the largest environmental enforcement action in the region's history. "Mr. Rivers?" Dr. Reese approached while Marcus was on a call with the FBI field office. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," Malik said. "How did you know? I mean, we have professional monitoring equipment, satellite data, years of records. But you, a high school student with homemade devices, you saw patterns we missed. How?" Malik considered the question carefully. "I don't think you missed them. I think you saw them but couldn't act because the system wouldn't let you. I could see them because I didn't know I wasn't supposed to look. He gestured to the maps on the table. Every adult I tried to share this with before the committee meeting told me the same thing. Be realistic, understand political realities, accept that change takes time. But kids in my neighborhood don't have time. They're breathing this air right now. So I built what I could build and documented what I could document, and I didn't stop because someone told me it was too complicated. Dr. Reese nodded slowly, something like recognition in his eyes. That's the problem with systems. They teach you all the reasons why things can't change. They make you complicit in maintaining problems because fighting them seems impossible. He extended his hand. Thank you for not accepting that, for refusing to be realistic. By mid-afternoon, the first EPA inspection teams were mobilizing. Malik watched through the conference room windows as official vehicles loaded with monitoring equipment pulled out of the underground garage, heading toward facilities that had operated without meaningful oversight for years. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from classmates who'd seen the news, interview requests from journalists, an email from his physics teacher that simply read, "I always knew you'd change the world. Proud doesn't even cover it." Marcus finished his calls and found Malik standing by the windows. Tired? Overwhelmed, Malik admitted. This morning I was just trying to make sure my research mattered. Now there's FBI investigations and emergency enforcement orders and, Dad, what if I'm wrong? What if my data has errors? Your data has been verified by 3 separate EPA analysts using professional equipment. The patterns hold. Marcus squeezed his shoulder. You weren't wrong, son. You were right in ways that scared powerful people, which is how you know you hit something real. What happens to all those people once the facilities get shut down? The ones who work there, I mean. They're just trying to feed their families. Marcus's expression softened. That's the right question to ask, and it's one that separates justice from vengeance. Shutting down illegal operations isn't the end goal. It's leverage to force compliance. Most of these facilities can operate cleanly if they invest in proper filtration and monitoring systems. The ones that can't or won't get phased out with job retraining programs and economic development funding for affected communities, he paused. But the people who've been breathing poison don't get a phase-out period. They need relief now. That's the balance we're trying to strike. They left EPA headquarters as the sun angled low over the Potomac, painting the monuments in shades of amber and gold. The SUV carried them back toward home through rush-hour traffic that felt surreal in its normalcy, people commuting, grabbing dinner, living ordinary lives while Malik's world had been completely transformed. His phone rang as they crossed the Anacostia River. Councilmember Patterson. Malik, I've been trying to reach you all day. Have you seen the news? Some of it. It's been kind of intense. Senator Whitmore just announced he's stepping down from the Environmental Committee chairmanship, citing health concerns. His office is in full crisis mode, staff resigning, donors pulling support. This is massive. Malik felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Good. He should step down. He should face charges. Oh, honey, he's going to. The Attorney General's office issued a statement an hour ago that Whitmore's under investigation for corruption, environmental violations, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. This isn't a resignation. This is a controlled demolition before the building collapses on him. Patterson's voice warmed. And it's because of you, because you refused to let them bury your research. It wasn't just me, Malik said quietly. A lot of people fought to make this happen. But you started it. You lit the match. Don't ever forget that. After the call ended, Malik sat in silence watching the familiar streets of his neighborhood roll past. Small row houses with front porches, corner stores with hand-painted signs, elderly men playing chess on folding tables. His community, still there, still breathing air that had been slowly killing them for years. But maybe now, finally, that would change. His grandmother was waiting on the front steps when they arrived, still in her work scrubs, her face drawn with exhaustion and pride in equal measure. She pulled Malik into a fierce hug the moment he stepped out of the car. Baby, I've been watching the news all day. Everyone at the hospital's talking about you. The cafeteria lady asked if you were my grandson. I told her yes, and she started crying. Said her grandson has asthma, lives in Langston, right near that chemical plant. She wanted me to thank you. Malik's throat tightened. I didn't do this for thanks, Graham. I know. That's why it matters. She turned to Marcus, her expression complex. "You've been busy today." "Just doing my job, Evelyn." "Your job, right." She studied her son-in-law for a long moment. "You planning to stick around, or is this just a quick visit before you disappear again?" The words hung sharp in the evening air. Marcus flinched, but didn't look away. "I cleared my schedule for the next month. I'm taking a leave of absence to be here. Actually, be here, while this case develops." He glanced at Malik. "And because my son needs me. Should have done it years ago." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Well then, I guess you'd better come inside. I made pot roast and there's plenty." They ate dinner together at the small kitchen table, 3 generations compressed into a space that felt both cramped and exactly right. Marcus asked about Evelyn's work at the hospital, really asked, listening to her stories about difficult patients and bureaucratic frustrations with genuine interest. Malik talked about his plans for expanding the monitoring network, ideas that had been percolating since the committee meeting. And slowly, in the space between passing dishes and sharing food, something that had been broken began to knit back together. "I've been thinking," Malik said over dessert, Evelyn's famous peach cobbler. "This isn't just a DC problem. Environmental racism is everywhere. What if we could build a national network of community monitors, give people the tools to document what's happening in their own neighborhoods?" Marcus set down his fork. "That's ambitious. You'd need funding, technical support, data management infrastructure. MIT reached out today, and Georgetown, and 3 different environmental foundations." Malik pulled out his phone, showed them the emails he'd been too overwhelmed to fully process. "They all want to help scale the project, turn it into something replicable." "Then you should do it," Evelyn said firmly. "You've already proven the concept works. Now show people it can work everywhere." "I'm still in high school, Graham. I've got college applications, SATs, and you've also got EPA analysts calling your research groundbreaking, senators resigning because of data you collected, and federal investigations built on evidence you provided." She pointed her spoon at him. "Baby, you're not going to have a normal senior year. Might as well make it extraordinary." Marcus laughed, a real laugh that Malik couldn't remember hearing in years. "She's right. You've already jumped off the cliff. Might as well build wings on the way down." They stayed up late planning, Malik's laptop open on the kitchen table, as they mapped out what a national environmental justice monitoring network might look like. Marcus made calls to foundation contacts and government partners who might provide support. Evelyn kept them supplied with coffee and practical concerns about making sure Malik still graduated on time. And somewhere in the middle of spreadsheets and logistics, Malik realized this was what family felt like when it actually worked. Not perfect, not without scars, but present and committed and fighting for the same things. Around midnight, Marcus's phone rang. FBI. He stepped into the hallway to take the call, and when he returned, his expression was grim. "What happened?" Malik asked. "Senator Whitmore's chief of staff just turned himself in to federal authorities. He's claiming Whitmore ordered him to interfere with environmental enforcement, offered kickbacks to judges including Hargrove, and maintained a list of priority protection facilities that were off-limits to EPA action regardless of violations." Marcus ran a hand over his face. "This is bigger than we thought. It's not just corruption, it's a systematic scheme to monetize regulatory immunity." "How many people were involved?" Evelyn asked. "They're still counting, but preliminary evidence suggests at least 15 federal and state judges, 37 companies, and possibly other senators." Marcus's jaw tightened. This is going to be one of the largest corruption prosecutions in decades, and it started because a teenager built an air quality monitor in his bedroom. The weight of that settled over them. Malik had wanted to make a difference, had hoped to change policy in his own city. He hadn't expected to accidentally expose a corruption network that stretched across state lines and implicated dozens of officials. The responsibility felt crushing. "Dad?" Malik's voice came out smaller than he intended. "I'm scared. If these people were willing to destroy my research, if they corrupted judges and senators, what's to stop them from coming after me?" Marcus crouched in front of his son's chair, eye level. "Me. The full weight of the United States Department of Justice, FBI protection if necessary. But more than that, Sunlight. The moment you went public with your research, you became too visible to quietly eliminate. They can't make you disappear without confirming everything you exposed. He gripped Malik's shoulders. I know this is frightening, but you're not alone in this fight. Not anymore. What if I hadn't called you yesterday? What if I just let them take my research? Then Judge Hargrove would have destroyed it. The EPA would have kept looking the other way, and kids in your neighborhood would have kept developing asthma while the system protected polluters. Marcus's eyes were fierce. You made the right choice, Malik, the brave choice, and now we're going to see it through together. Over the following days, the story metastasized across national media. Cable news ran continuous coverage of what they were calling Airgate, the environmental corruption scandal that had been broken open by a high school student's science project. Malik's face appeared on magazine covers and news broadcasts. He was invited to testify before Congress, to speak at environmental conferences, to collaborate with researchers at major universities. But beneath the media circus, real change was grinding into motion. EPA teams descended on polluting facilities with enforcement authority backed by federal court orders. Companies that had operated with impunity for years suddenly faced closure threats and massive fines they couldn't dodge. Senator Whitmore was formally indicted on 17 counts of corruption, conspiracy, and violating environmental protection laws. Judge Hargrove flipped completely, providing testimony that implicated 3 other federal judges and a state Supreme Court justice. And in neighborhoods across D.C., in Langston and Fairmont Heights and Anacostia, people started breathing air that didn't burn their lungs. The change wasn't immediate or magical, but monitoring stations that Malik's research had finally forced the city to install began showing improvement within weeks as facilities implemented emergency filtration measures or temporarily shut down pending compliance reviews. Malik returned to the Environmental Justice Committee exactly 1 week after his first attempted presentation, this time with his father, an EPA delegation, and enough media coverage to pack the meeting room beyond capacity. But when he stood at the front of the room and powered on his device, now protected, documented, and certified as evidence in federal prosecutions, he wasn't thinking about cameras or headlines. He was thinking about the cafeteria lady at his grandmother's hospital, whose grandson could breathe easier. About kids in his neighborhood who'd spend their lives fighting asthma because the system had valued corporate profits over their health. About every time someone had told him his work didn't matter, that he was too young to understand, that change was impossible. Good morning, Malik began, his voice steady despite the chaos of attention. My name is Malik Rivers, and I'm here to present evidence that our city has been systematically poisoning its poorest residents. But I'm also here to show you something else. Proof that when we stop accepting injustice as inevitable, when we document truth and demand accountability, systems can be forced to change. He walked them through his data one more time, but with a difference. Now the pollution maps had companion slides showing enforcement actions, facility shutdowns, air quality improvements measured in real time by city-installed monitors. The before and after was stark and undeniable. This is what's possible when people care more about lives than politics, Malik concluded. When research gets protected instead of suppressed. When justice actually means equal protection under the law, not just for people who can afford it, but for everyone. He paused, looked directly at the council members. I built one device and documented 43 locations. Imagine what we could do with 100 devices, 1,000. Imagine giving every community the tools to see what's being done to them and the evidence to force change. The applause that followed was thunderous, but what mattered more were the votes that came after. Unanimous approval for citywide monitoring expansion, full funding for community-based environmental justice initiatives, a resolution demanding federal prosecution of all officials who'd participated in the corruption scheme, and a proclamation declaring August 15th as Environmental Justice Day in Washington, D.C., commemorating the date a 17-year-old refused to accept that poison was the price of being poor. Afterward, Councilmember Patterson pulled Malik aside while his father dealt with reporters. I've been in politics for 23 years, she said quietly. I've seen a lot of people try to make a difference. Most of them get worn down, compromise themselves into irrelevance, or give up. But you, she shook her head. You're different. You've got truth on your side, you're too young to know you're supposed to fail, and you've got the Attorney General of the United States as your father. That's a dangerous combination for anyone trying to maintain the status quo. I don't want to be dangerous, Malik said. I just want people to be able to breathe. That's exactly why you're dangerous. Because you mean it. She squeezed his arm. Don't lose that. Don't let this system teach you to accept incremental progress when people's lives are at stake. Stay angry. Stay honest. Stay impossible. Marcus found him a few minutes later, guided him away from the crowd, and they walked together through the courthouse complex that had been the site of such trauma and transformation. Past the courtroom where Malik had nearly been broken, past the security checkpoint where his work had almost been destroyed. Out into afternoon sunlight that felt different somehow, cleaner, brighter, charged with the possibility of actual change. You know what I realized watching you in there, Marcus said as they reached the street. You're better at this than I am. At what? Fighting for justice without getting lost in the system. I've spent so many years navigating bureaucracy, making compromises, accepting that change happens slowly. But you just saw something wrong and refused to accept it. You didn't ask permission or wait for approval. You built what needed building and forced everyone else to pay attention. His father's voice was thick with emotion. I'm supposed to be teaching you how the world works. But maybe you're teaching me how it should work. Malik felt tears sting his eyes. I learned that from you, Dad. From watching you fight, even when it costs you everything. Even when it means missing your son's childhood, because you're trying to save everyone else's children. They stood there on the courthouse steps, two men bound by blood and now by battle, and something fundamental shifted between them. Not forgiveness exactly. Some wounds needed more time to heal, but recognition, understanding, a shared purpose that might eventually bridge the years of distance. I'm going to do better, Marcus said. Be present. Show up. Not just for crisis moments, but for regular life. For dinner and homework help and stupid father-son movies. And I'm going to stop resenting you for caring about more than just me, Malik replied. Because this week taught me that fighting for justice means fighting for everybody, and that's not selfish. That's who you are. Marcus pulled his son into a tight embrace, and Malik let himself be held, let himself be 17 and scared and brave and tired all at once. They stood like that while the city moved around them, two figures on the steps of a courthouse that no longer felt like a monument to oppression, but a reminder that truth, when spoken loudly enough, could actually make power listen. The sun dipped lower, painting shadows across the street. Somewhere in the city, EPA teams were inspecting facilities that had poisoned communities for profit. Somewhere, FBI agents were building cases that would send corrupt officials to prison. Somewhere, a senator was realizing his career was over, and a judge was learning that robes didn't grant immunity from consequences. And here, on these steps, a father and son were finally learning how to be present for each other. 3 weeks after the courthouse confrontation, Malik stood in a chemistry lab at Georgetown University, surrounded by graduate students who looked at him with a mixture of respect and barely concealed envy. Dr. Sarah Chen, the MIT professor who'd reached out that first chaotic day, had flown in specifically to examine his monitoring device and discuss expanding the project into a national network. She held the black box in her hands like it was something precious, turning it over to examine the sensor array he'd configured from salvaged parts and determination. This is elegant work, she said, her accent carrying traces of her Taiwanese childhood. You bypass the calibration issues that plague most homemade monitors by using comparative readings across multiple sensors. The redundancy compensates for individual sensor drift. She looked up at Malik with sharp, intelligent eyes. Did someone teach you this technique, or did you figure it out yourself? Figured it out. I kept getting inconsistent readings from single sensors, so I started clustering them and averaging the data. It took about 40 iterations before I got it stable. Malik felt self-conscious under the scrutiny of actual scientists. I'm sure there are better methods. There are more expensive methods, Dr. Chen interrupted. But better? For community deployment where cost and durability matter more than laboratory precision? This might be the best approach I've seen. She set the device down carefully. MIT wants to offer you early admission with a full scholarship. I'm authorized to make that offer official today. The words hung in the air. Around them, graduate students had stopped pretending to work on their own projects, all attention focused on this moment. Malik's mind reeled. MIT, full scholarship, early admission. 3 weeks ago, he'd been worried about regular college applications and whether he could afford state school tuition even with financial aid. Malik's voice caught. That's incredible, thank you, but I need to think about it. There's so much happening here right now, and I don't want to abandon the work before... Before what? Dr. Chen's tone was gentle but firm. Before you personally solve every environmental justice issue in America? Malik, you're 17 years old. You've already exposed massive corruption, triggered federal investigations, and forced policy changes. You don't have to carry this entire movement by yourself. But the monitoring network, the expansion plans, will happen whether you're physically in DC or not. The infrastructure you've built isn't dependent on your daily presence. It's dependent on the systems you've set in motion. She gestured to the other people in the lab. We have PhD candidates who can manage deployment logistics. EPA has personnel who can handle enforcement. What we need from you is the continued innovation, building better tools, refining methodologies, training others to replicate your work. That happens best in an academic environment with resources and support. One of the graduate students, a black woman named Jasmine, who'd been particularly helpful explaining the university's environmental justice initiatives, spoke up. For what it's worth, you've already changed how we think about community-engaged research. Half the projects in this department are being redesigned to include the kind of ground-level documentation you pioneered. You being at MIT would accelerate that transformation across multiple institutions. Malik felt the weight of expectation pressing down. Everyone wanted something from him now. Testimony for congressional hearings, interviews for documentaries, speaking engagements at conferences. His inbox had gone from 12 emails a day to hundreds, his voicemail constantly full. Even walking through his neighborhood had changed, people stopping him to say thank you, to share their own stories of pollution and neglect, to ask what they could do to help. It was exhausting and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. His phone buzzed, a text from his father. Court today, Whitmore's arraignment, thought you might want to watch. Attached was a link to the live stream from the federal courthouse where Senator Grant Whitmore would be formally charged with the crimes that Malik's research had helped expose. I need to go, Malik said, showing Dr. Chen the message. The senator's being arraigned. Of course. But Malik? She waited until he met her eyes. Think seriously about MIT, not because you owe us anything, but because you deserve the chance to develop your gifts in an environment designed to nurture them. You've spent 18 months fighting. Maybe it's time to spend 4 years learning how to fight even more effectively. The walk back to his grandmother's house took 20 minutes through afternoon heat that shimmered off the pavement. Malik's neighborhood looked different now. News vans still appeared regularly, and the community had developed a protective instinct about their local hero. Mrs. Washington from 3 doors down waved from her porch where she sat shelling peas. Mr. Marcus, no relation to Malik's father despite the shared name, called out from his front steps where he was repairing a bike. Saw you on the news again, young man, making us all proud. Malik waved back, feeling both grateful and overwhelmed by the attention. He'd never wanted to be famous. He just wanted to matter, to make a difference, to prove that kids from neighborhoods like his could contribute something valuable to the world. His grandmother was home early, sitting at the kitchen table with the laptop Marcus had bought her, video chat open with Malik's father. They both looked up when he entered. Baby, come here. Your father was just telling me about the arraignment. Evelyn gestured him closer to the screen. Marcus's face filled the monitor, somewhere in the Justice Department with the unmistakable backdrop of official seals and American flags. Malik, Whitmore's pleading not guilty, but his legal team knows they're dead in the water. Judge Hargrove's testimony alone is damning, and we've got paper trails on everything, campaign contributions, meeting schedules, enforcement delays that coincide perfectly with donor requests. How long until trial? Malik asked. Realistically, 6 to 8 months. But his attorneys are already floating plea deal inquiries. They want to minimize prison time in exchange for full cooperation against other implicated officials. Marcus's expression was grim satisfaction. We're going to use him to dismantle the entire network. Every company that paid for regulatory immunity, every judge who took kickbacks, every official who looked the other way while communities were poisoned. And then what? Malik heard the exhaustion in his own voice. We prosecute them. They go to prison, and then what? The neighborhoods are still poor, the facilities are still there. The structural problems that made this corruption possible don't just disappear because we locked up a senator. Silence followed his words. His grandmother reached over, covered his hand with hers. His father's face on the screen showed something between pride and concern. You're right, Marcus said finally. Punishment isn't the same as justice, and justice isn't the same as healing. That's the next phase, the harder phase. Using the attention from these prosecutions to push for comprehensive environmental justice legislation, federal funding for monitoring networks, mandatory health impact assessments for industrial facilities and residential areas, criminal penalties for executives who knowingly expose communities to harmful pollution. How long will that take?
Years, maybe decades for full implementation. His father's honesty was both refreshing and devastating. This is generational work, son. We've won a battle, maybe even changed the trajectory of the war, but the war itself, that continues long after any of us are gone. Malik felt something heavy settle in his chest. He'd known intellectually that systemic change was slow, but living inside this moment, seeing the attention and energy while knowing it would eventually fade, made the reality hit differently. In 6 months, the news cycle would move on. People would forget about the teenager who exposed corruption, and the communities that had been poisoning would still need someone fighting for them. MIT offered me early admission, he said abruptly. Full scholarship. Evelyn's hand tightened on his. On screen, his father went very still. That's wonderful, baby, his grandmother said carefully. What did you tell them? That I needed to think about it. There's still so much to do here. So you'll do it from MIT, Marcus interrupted. Malik, listen to me. You think staying in DC means you're committed to the cause, but that's not how this works. The most effective advocates are the ones with expertise, credentials, and institutional backing. MIT gives you all three. 4 years from now, you could return with an engineering degree, published research, and connections to environmental justice organizations across the country. That's worth more than staying local to manage a project that's already succeeded. But what if people think I'm abandoning them? What if you're a 17-year-old kid who deserves to go to college without carrying the weight of an entire movement on your shoulders? Evelyn's voice was sharp with protective love. Baby, you've done extraordinary things. You've changed lives. But you're not responsible for fixing everything wrong with the world before you graduate high school. Malik felt tears sting his eyes. I just don't want to let people down. You couldn't if you tried, Marcus said firmly. The work you've started will continue because you built something real, documentation, evidence, proof that can't be ignored, that exists independent of whether you're physically in DC or Boston. And frankly, son, going to MIT doesn't mean abandoning the fight. It means preparing yourself to fight at a higher level. They talked for another hour, working through Malik's fears and doubts, and the complicated guilt of having opportunities that his neighbors' kids might never access. Eventually, Marcus had to return to meetings, but before disconnecting, he made Malik promise to seriously consider the MIT offer. And Malik, his father added, I'm proud of you. Not just for what you've accomplished, but for caring enough to worry about what comes next. That's the mark of someone who'll keep making a difference for decades, not just in one viral moment. After the call ended, Malik sat with his grandmother in comfortable silence while she prepared dinner. Baked chicken, collard greens, cornbread. The familiar smells grounded him, reminded him that underneath all the chaos and attention, he was still just Malik Rivers from Fairmont Heights, raised by a woman who'd worked night shifts to keep him fed and safe. Gram? He said as she seasoned the chicken. Do you think Mom would be proud of what I did? Evelyn set down the paprika, turned to face him fully. Her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. Baby, your mama would be bursting with pride. She always said you had a fire in you, something that wouldn't let injustice stand. I see her in you every day, in the way you care about people, and how you refuse to accept that suffering is inevitable. She cupped his face. She'd also tell you to go to MIT, to take every opportunity you can grab and use it to make the world better. That's what she would have wanted for you.
That night, Malik couldn't sleep. He lay in his small bedroom staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of his neighborhood. Distant sirens, someone's music playing, the rumble of the bus on the main road. His monitoring device sat on his desk, inactive but somehow still present, a reminder of everything that had changed because he'd refused to accept that documentation was impossible. Around 2 a.m., he got up and opened his laptop, pulled up the MIT scholarship offer that Dr. Chen had forwarded. Full tuition, room and board, research stipend. It was more than generous. It was life-changing. And attached to the offer was a proposal to establish the Malik Rivers Environmental Justice Fellowship, a program that would bring community advocates to MIT each year to develop monitoring technologies and enforcement strategies. They were naming a fellowship after him. At 17, before he'd even graduated high school, his work was considered significant enough to build an entire academic program around. The weight of that responsibility was crushing and inspiring in equal measure. Malik opened a new email and began typing. Dr. Chen, thank you for the generous offer and for believing in my work. After thinking carefully and talking with my family, I'm honored to accept the early admission to MIT. I want to learn how to build better tools, develop more effective strategies, and train others to document injustice in their own communities. But I also want to make something clear. I'm not going to MIT to escape DC or leave this work behind. I'm going to get better at it, to become the kind of advocate these communities deserve. The fight doesn't end when I move to Boston. It's just beginning. Sincerely, Malik Rivers. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then sat back feeling strangely lighter. The decision was made. Now he just had to figure out how to tell everyone who'd been depending on him that he was leaving. The next morning, Malik requested a meeting with the Environmental Justice Committee. Council member Patterson arranged it for that afternoon, and when Malik arrived, he found not just committee members but representatives from a dozen community organizations throughout the city. The room was packed, standing room only, filled with people who'd been following his work since the beginning. Thank you all for coming, Malik began, standing at the front with his hand shaking slightly. I have news I wanted to share directly, rather than letting you hear it secondhand. I've accepted early admission to MIT with a full scholarship. I'll be leaving for Boston at the end of summer. The silence that followed was loaded with complex emotions. Then someone in the back started clapping, slow, deliberate. Others joined until the room erupted in applause that felt both like celebration and farewell. Councilmember Patterson stood. Malik, this is wonderful news. MIT is lucky to have you. But I'm worried, Malik continued, speaking over the applause that was dying down. I'm worried that when I leave, the momentum will stop, that people will think the work is done because one senator got indicted and some facilities got temporarily shut down. But that's not enough. None of this is enough until every community has the same right to clean air, until environmental racism is treated like the crime it is, until kids in poor neighborhoods have the same chance to breathe easy as kids in rich ones. So what do you propose? Someone called out. Malik had prepared for this. He pulled up a presentation on the room's screen, months of planning compressed into a blueprint for sustainability. The monitoring network needs to become permanent infrastructure, managed by community members with technical training and EPA oversight. I've been working with Dr. Chen at MIT to develop a training program. 2-week intensive courses that teach people to build, deploy, and maintain monitoring equipment. The first cohort starts next month, and I'll run the pilot before leaving for college. The slide changed, showing organizational structure. We're also establishing the Community Air Quality Alliance, a coalition of neighborhood organizations, environmental lawyers, and academic partners who can continue enforcement pressure independent of any single individual. The EPA has committed to quarterly review meetings where community data gets presented directly to enforcement decision-makers. Another slide, funding sources. Georgetown and MIT are jointly funding the first 2 years of operations. After that, the City Council will need to allocate budget for ongoing monitoring and data management. That's where political advocacy comes in, making sure this isn't treated as a temporary program, but as permanent infrastructure. He walked them through contingency plans, succession leadership, and documentation protocols that would ensure everything he'd built didn't collapse the moment he left. By the time he finished, the anxiety in the room had transformed into cautious optimism. "You've thought of everything," Patterson said, something like wonder in her voice. "This isn't you abandoning ship. You're building a ship that can sail without you. That's the goal. No movement should depend on one person. The moment it does, it becomes vulnerable." Malik met the eyes of people scattered throughout the room, community activists who'd supported him, residents who'd hosted monitoring equipment, lawyers who'd volunteered countless hours. "You all made this possible. You trusted a kid with a crazy idea and helped turn it into something real. Now I'm asking you to keep it real while I go learn how to make it even better." The questions came fast after that. Technical details, organizational concerns, funding timelines. Malik answered what he could and promised to document everything he didn't know. As the meeting wound down, people approached individually to shake his hand, to wish him well, to make him promise he'd come back. An elderly woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who lived 2 blocks from Meridian Chemical and whose grandson had asthma, gripped his hand with surprising strength. "My boy breathes easier now because of you. The air don't burn his lungs no more. Whatever you do at that fancy college, don't you forget that what matters is people like my grandson. Not awards or degrees, just people trying to live without poison. I won't forget," Malik promised. "That's why I'm going. To get better at helping people like your grandson." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "You got a good heart, child. Don't let that school make you cold." The weeks that followed were a blur of activity that left Malik exhausted but purposeful. He ran the first monitoring equipment training session with 15 community members, teaching them everything he'd learned through trial and error. He testified before a congressional subcommittee via video conference. His research entered into the official record as evidence supporting new environmental justice legislation. He gave interviews to journalists writing long-form pieces about youth activism and systemic racism in environmental policy. And through it all, his father was present, not just via phone calls and video chats, but physically there, attending training sessions, helping review legal documents, sitting in the audience when Malik gave presentations. Marcus had taken a partial leave of absence, delegating some responsibilities to allow him to be in D.C. more consistently. It wasn't perfect. There were still emergency calls and unavoidable meetings, but it was real presence in a way Malik had stopped believing was possible. One evening, they sat on the front steps of his grandmother's house, watching the sunset over the neighborhood. A group of kids played basketball at the corner, their laughter carrying on the humid air. A monitoring station, one of the new permanent installations the city had funded, hummed quietly on the utility pole across the street. "You know what I realized?" Marcus said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I spent your whole childhood trying to fix broken systems, but I never stopped to consider that maybe the systems broke me too. Made me think that being absent was the price of being effective, that I had to choose between being a good father and being good at my job." "You are good at your job," Malik said quietly. "Maybe. But I could have been a better father. Should have been." Marcus turned to face him. "Watching you these past weeks, seeing how you managed to care deeply about the work without letting it consume your humanity, that's taught me something. You can fight for justice without sacrificing the people you love. You just have to be intentional about it." "I learned that from you," Malik said. "From watching how much you cared even when it cost you everything. Even when it meant we didn't see each other. I never doubted that you loved me, Dad. I just wished you loved me as much as you loved the work." Marcus's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you more than anything in this world, more than any job, any case, any measure of success. I'm sorry it took me this long to show you that properly." They sat together as the light faded, 2 men learning how to be father and son in the space between fighting for others and caring for each other. The neighborhood sounds wrapped around them, familiar, comfortable, home. "When you get to MIT," Marcus said eventually, "don't lose this. Don't let academia make you forget why you started. You built that monitoring device because you saw kids with inhalers and decided it mattered. That clarity, that connection to real human suffering is worth more than any credential." Mrs. Fletcher said basically the same thing. "Told me not to let school make me cold." "Mrs. Fletcher's a wise woman," Marcus smiled. "And she's right. The best advocates are the ones who never forget what they're advocating for. Not abstract principles, but actual people with names and faces, and children who deserve to breathe clean air. August arrived with suffocating heat and the looming reality of departure. Malik had packed and repacked his belongings a dozen times, unable to shake the feeling he was forgetting something essential. His room looked strange, half-empty, posters taken down, books boxed up. The monitoring device he'd built, the original one that had started everything, sat wrapped in protective foam, ready to travel to MIT's engineering department where it would be displayed as the prototype that launched a movement. His last night in D.C., the community organized a block party in his honor. Someone strung lights between houses, and tables appeared laden with food. His grandmother's macaroni and cheese, Mrs. Washington's potato salad, Mr. Marcus's grilled chicken, contributions from dozens of families. Music played from portable speakers. Kids ran wild with the freedom of summer evening, and adults gathered in clusters sharing stories and laughter. Council Member Patterson presented him with an official city proclamation declaring his contributions to environmental justice. Dr. Reese from the EPA gave him a framed map showing pollution reductions across the monitored areas, real improvements measured in parts per million, and hospital admission rates. Captain Williams from Courthouse Security brought a plaque honoring his courage and integrity. But the gift that broke him came from the kids. 30 children from the neighborhood had drawn pictures of what clean air meant to them. Trees and flowers, clear skies, kids playing outside without fear. One drawing showed a boy that looked like Malik holding a box labeled Air Fixer, surrounded by smiling people. The caption read, "Thank you for helping us breathe." Malik held that picture and couldn't stop the tears that came. His grandmother wrapped her arms around him while he cried, and his father stood close, one hand on his shoulder, anchor and support. "You did this," Evelyn whispered. "You changed their lives, baby. Never forget that." The party went late into the night, and when it finally wound down, Malik helped clean up alongside his neighbors. This community that had raised him and supported him and believed in him even when the system tried to crush his work. They stacked chairs and gathered trash and packed up leftover food, and in that simple communal labor, Malik felt the weight of connection, roots that would hold even when he was hundreds of miles away. His father drove him to Union Station the next morning for the train to Boston. Move-in day at MIT was still 3 days away, but Malik had been invited to arrive early for orientation sessions with other scholarship students. His grandmother had cried at breakfast but refused to come to the station, saying she hated goodbyes and would rather remember him at the kitchen table. On the platform, Marcus pulled his son into a fierce embrace. "Call me when you get there. Call me regularly. And Malik, if you ever need anything, advice, support, just someone to talk to, I'm here, always." "I know, Dad. Thank you for showing up when I needed you. Thank you for giving me another chance to be your father." Marcus pulled back, gripped Malik's shoulders. "Go learn everything they can teach you. Come back smarter, stronger, more effective. And then help me finish what we started." The train whistle blew. Malik grabbed his bags, moved toward the doors, turned back one last time. His father stood on the platform looking older somehow, vulnerable in a way Malik had never seen. A man who'd spent decades fighting for justice, finally learning how to fight for his own son. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, son. Make them remember our name." The train rolled north through the late August heat, carrying Malik away from everything familiar toward a future he'd never imagined possible. He pressed his forehead against the window, watching D.C. blur into Maryland suburbs, then Delaware farmland, his reflection ghosting over the landscape like he existed in two places at once. His phone buzzed constantly, messages from his grandmother reminding him to eat properly, from classmates wishing him luck, from community organizers promising to keep the work alive. One text stood out, from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Judge Hargrove. I know I have no right to contact you, but I wanted you to know that watching you refuse to be broken changed something in me. I'm cooperating fully with prosecutors. It won't undo the harm I've caused, but maybe it can prevent future harm. You showed me what courage actually looks like. Thank you." Malik stared at those words for a long time before deleting the message. Forgiveness wasn't something he owed to a man who tried to destroy him, but acknowledgement of change. That felt possible. Not today, maybe not ever, but possible. MIT's campus emerged from Boston's urban sprawl like something from a different world. Sleek modern buildings mixed with classical architecture, students everywhere despite summer break, an energy that hummed with possibility and pressure in equal measure. Malik's assigned dorm was in a building that overlooked the Charles River, and his room, though small, had a view that made his chest tight with the reality of how far he'd come. His roommate arrived an hour later, a tall Indian kid named Arjun, who was studying computer science and had already published 2 papers on machine learning applications for climate modeling. They sized each other up with the awkward caution of strangers forced into intimacy, until Arjun noticed Malik's monitoring device being carefully unpacked. "Wait, you're that Malik Rivers, the one who exposed the corruption network?" "Yeah," Malik said, bracing himself for whatever came next. "Dude, you're a legend. My thesis advisor has been using your methodology as an example of effective community-engaged research. Half the environmental engineering department wants to meet you." Arjun grinned. "This is going to be the best freshman year ever." The orientation sessions were overwhelming. Hundreds of brilliant students from around the world, all of them accomplished, all of them hungry to prove themselves. Malik attended workshops on time management, academic resources, mental health support. He met with Dr. Chen, who introduced him to the Environmental Justice Lab, where he'd be working on expanding the monitoring network. And he sat through a presentation about the fellowship being established in his name, feeling surreal as administrators described how his work would support future generations of community advocates. On the third day, during a meet and greet with faculty and scholarship recipients, an older professor approached Malik. Dr. James Patterson, no relation to Council Member Patterson, was a legendary figure in environmental engineering, someone whose textbooks Malik had studied, whose research had shaped EPA policy for decades. "Mr. Rivers," he said, extending a weathered hand, "I've been hoping to meet you. Your pollution mapping techniques are more sophisticated than work I've seen from doctoral candidates. Where did you learn geospatial analysis?" "YouTube, mostly," Malik admitted, "and a lot of trial and error." Dr. Patterson laughed, a sound like gravel shifting. "The best education. I'd like to work with you this year, if you're interested. I'm developing a national framework for community air quality monitoring, and I could use someone who actually understands how to make technology accessible to people without engineering degrees." "I'm a freshman," Malik protested. "Don't you usually work with graduate students?" "Usually, but you've already accomplished more than most of my graduate students will in their entire careers. Age is just a number. Impact is what matters." He handed Malik a card. "Think about it. My lab meets Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. You're welcome anytime." Classes started the following week, and Malik was immediately drowning. Calculus moved at a pace that left him frantically reviewing concepts every night. Chemistry assumed knowledge he'd never learned at his underfunded high school. Even his engineering design course, which should have been easy given his practical experience, challenged him with theoretical frameworks he'd never encountered. He spent 12-hour days in the library, survived on coffee and determination, and called his grandmother twice a week, trying not to let her hear the exhaustion in his voice. His father checked in regularly, offering encouragement and carefully not mentioning the trial preparation consuming his own time. Senator Whitmore's prosecution was building toward a January court date, and Marcus was personally overseeing the case to ensure nothing got mishandled. 6 weeks into the semester, Malik hit a wall. He failed his first calculus exam. Not just failed, but scored a 43, the kind of failure that threatened his scholarship status. He sat in his dorm room, staring at the grade, feeling everything he'd built crumbling around him. Maybe he wasn't smart enough for MIT. Maybe he'd gotten here on luck and media attention rather than actual ability. Maybe he was just a kid from a poor neighborhood pretending to belong in a world designed for people much better prepared than he'd ever be. His phone rang. "Dr. Chen. Malik, I just got a notification that you failed an exam. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he lied. "You're not fine. Come to my office. Now." 20 minutes later, he sat across from Dr. Chen in her cluttered office filled with monitoring equipment and research papers. She studied him with the kind of sharp attention that missed nothing. "Talk to me," she said simply. Everything spilled out. The overwhelming coursework, the feeling of being constantly behind, the imposter syndrome that whispered he didn't deserve to be here. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting, and when he finally ran out of words, she leaned back in her chair. You know what your problem is? You're trying to be two people at once. You're trying to be Malik Rivers, the environmental justice hero, while also being Malik Rivers, the regular freshman struggling with calculus. Those aren't compatible identities right now, and the conflict is tearing you apart. I don't understand. You came to MIT carrying the weight of a movement, feeling responsible for every community counting on you, terrified that taking time for yourself means abandoning the work. But Malik, you're 18 years old taking college-level courses for the first time. You're supposed to struggle. You're supposed to fail tests and feel overwhelmed. That's not weakness. That's the learning process. She leaned forward. Give yourself permission to just be a student for a while. The movement will survive without you micromanaging every detail. Your value isn't measured by how many hours you work or how quickly you solve every problem. But people are counting on me. People are counting on you to become the best version of yourself, which means accepting help when you need it, taking time to actually learn, and understanding that sustainable activism requires rest and growth, not constant exhaustion. Dr. Chen pulled up something on her computer. MIT has tutoring resources, study groups, academic support specifically for first-generation college students. You're not the first brilliant person to struggle with the transition. Use the help that's available. Malik felt something crack open in his chest. Relief mixed with shame, mixed with desperate hope that maybe he could actually do this. What if I can't catch up? What if I lose my scholarship? Then we'll figure it out. But Malik, your scholarship isn't contingent on perfect grades. It's based on potential and impact, both of which you've demonstrated beyond question. One failed exam doesn't erase what you've accomplished. She smiled gently. Give yourself the same grace you'd give someone else in your position. What would you tell a kid from your neighborhood who is struggling at MIT? I'd tell them they belong here. That struggle doesn't mean failure. It means growth. Exactly. Now apply that wisdom to yourself. Malik started attending tutoring sessions 3 times a week. He joined a study group for chemistry where other students, most of them also from underfunded schools, worked through problems together without judgment. He met with his academic advisor to discuss time management and realistic course loads. And slowly, painfully, he started to improve. The calculus retake exam came in early November. Malik studied for 2 weeks straight, attended every tutoring session, worked through hundreds of practice problems. When he sat down to take the test, his hands were shaking, but his mind was clear. The questions that had seemed incomprehensible 6 weeks ago now made sense, patterns emerging from formulas he'd finally internalized. He scored an 89. Not perfect, but passing. More importantly, earned through genuine understanding rather than memorization. Proud of you, his father said when Malik called to share the news. Not because of the grade, but because you asked for help and did the work to improve. That's harder than exposing corruption. How's the trial preparation going? Malik asked. Marcus was silent for a moment. Intense. Whitmore's legal team is trying every delay tactic imaginable, but we've got him cold. Judge Hargrove's testimony alone would be enough to convict, but we've also got financial records, recorded phone calls, email chains. It's an overwhelming case. He paused. The trial starts January 8th. I'd like you to be there, if you can manage it around your exam schedule. I'll be there, Malik said without hesitation. December brought snow and final exams and the strange dislocation of returning to D.C. for winter break. His neighborhood looked different under a light dusting of snow, smaller somehow, less overwhelming than it had seemed his entire life. But the monitoring station still hummed on the utility pole, and the air quality readings posted weekly in the community newsletter showed continued improvement. His grandmother had aged in the months he'd been gone, or maybe Malik was just seeing her clearly for the first time. The lines around her eyes had deepened, her movement slower, but her hug was fierce as ever when he walked through the door. Let me look at you, she said, holding him at arm's length. You're too thin. They're not feeding you enough at that school. I'm fine, Graham, just stressed from finals. Well, you're home now. I'll fix that. She pulled him toward the kitchen where the smell of baking ham and sweet potato pie promised comfort and calories in equal measure. That evening, the community center held a welcome home gathering. Malik hadn't expected it, but people turned out. Families whose children breathed easier, activists who'd continued the work, officials who'd implemented the reforms his research had demanded. Councilmember Patterson was there, along with Dr. Reese from the EPA, Captain Williams from Courthouse Security, even some of his old teachers. The monitoring network is fully operational, Patterson told him, showing data on her tablet. 43 original sites plus 18 new locations. We've documented violations at 3 facilities that weren't on your original map, and EPA moved on them within weeks. Real enforcement with real consequences. And the training program? Malik asked. 3rd cohort just graduated. We've trained 62 community members to deploy and maintain monitoring equipment. Some of them are talking about starting similar programs in other cities: Baltimore, Philadelphia, Richmond. Your model is spreading, she smiled. You started something that's bigger than any one person now. That's the definition of success. Mrs. Fletcher approached, her grandson, a healthy-looking 8-year-old, in tow. Mr. Malik, this is Marcus. He wanted to meet you. Marcus, this is the young man I told you about. The boy looked up at Malik with wide eyes. You're the one who fixed the air? I helped document the problem, Malik said, crouching to the child's eye level. A lot of people work together to fix it. My grandma says I don't have to use my inhaler as much anymore. Is that 'cause of you? Malik's throat tightened. It's because people cared enough to make things better, and because your grandma fought to make sure the city listened. When I grow up, I want to be a scientist like you, little Marcus said with absolute certainty. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes were wet with tears. You see? You changed more than air quality. You changed what these children think is possible. Later that night, Malik sat on his grandmother's front steps, despite the cold, staring at the monitoring station across the street. Its small LED display showed current air quality index, 38, well within healthy range. 6 months ago, that number had regularly spiked above 150, deep into the red zone of dangerous exposure. His father found him there, appearing with the quiet that suggested he'd driven straight from the Justice Department despite the late hour. Marcus sat beside his son without speaking, and they watched the neighborhood together. Lights in windows, the occasional car passing, the ordinary life of a community that didn't know it was slowly being poisoned anymore. Judge Hargrove's sentencing hearing is next week, Marcus said finally. He's pleading guilty to corruption, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. Recommended sentence is 3 years, eligible for parole in 18 months. That's not enough, Malik said. No, it's not, but it's what he earned through cooperation. His testimony is going to put away people who did far worse than he did. Marcus turned to look at his son. Justice isn't always satisfying. Sometimes it's just the best outcome we can negotiate from a broken system. Is Whitmore going to trial? He wants to. His lawyers think they can create reasonable doubt, confuse the jury with technical details and political theater. They're wrong, but they're going to try. Marcus's voice hardened. I'm not letting him walk. Not after what he did to you, to this community, to every person who trusted their government to protect them. The trial of Senator Grant Whitmore began on a gray January morning with camera crews packed 3 deep outside the federal courthouse. Malik sat in the gallery between his grandmother and Dr. Chen, who'd flown in from MIT specifically to attend. The courtroom was larger than the one where Judge Hargrove had tried to break him, filled with reporters and lawyers and spectators who'd lined up hours before the doors opened. Whitmore entered looking diminished. The powerful senator reduced to a defendant in an expensive suit that couldn't hide his fear. His legal team surrounded him like shields, but Malik could see the cracks in their confidence. They knew what evidence the prosecution had. They knew this was already lost. Marcus stood to deliver the opening statement, and Malik saw his father transformed into something magnificent and terrible, the full weight of federal authority wielded with surgical precision. His voice filled the courtroom as he laid out the case in devastating detail. The evidence will show that Senator Grant Whitmore operated a criminal enterprise disguised as public service. For 8 years, he accepted millions of dollars from companies that were systematically poisoning low-income communities. In exchange, he used his position as Environmental Committee chairman to obstruct enforcement, pressure EPA officials, and corrupt federal judges to dismiss legitimate complaints. The evidence will show phone records, financial transactions, and testimony from co-conspirators who've already pleaded guilty. But most importantly, the evidence will show the human cost: children with asthma, elderly residents with respiratory disease, communities that trusted their government and were betrayed for profit. He gestured to a display screen where Malik's pollution maps appeared. Red zones stark against green, the visual representation of environmental racism that couldn't be explained away. This data was compiled by a 17-year-old high school student named Malik Rivers. Senator Whitmore's first instinct when confronted with this evidence wasn't to investigate or reform. It was to bury it. To deploy a corrupt judge to confiscate the research and intimidate the researcher. That decision, that moment of panic when truth threatened profit, is what brought us here today. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Malik attended when his class schedule allowed, watching witness after witness dismantle Whitmore's defense. Judge Hargrove testified for 2 days, detailing phone calls where Whitmore's chief of staff explicitly ordered him to suppress environmental complaints from minority neighborhoods while expediting cases in wealthy areas. Company executives testified about donations that came with implicit expectations of regulatory protection. EPA whistleblowers described political pressure that made their jobs impossible. And then Malik was called to testify. He'd known it was coming, had prepared with Rebecca Moss going over questions and likely defense strategies. But walking to the witness stand with the entire courtroom watching felt surreal, like some alternate version of his life where he'd become important enough that federal trials hinged on his words. Marcus handled the direct examination himself, keeping questions simple and focused. Malik described building his monitoring device, collecting data across 43 locations, discovering the pollution patterns that revealed systematic discrimination. He explained his attempt to present the research to the Environmental Justice Committee and what happened instead. The security checkpoint, Judge Hargrove's interference, the confiscation that had nearly destroyed 18 months of work. "What did Judge Hargrove say to you in his courtroom?" Marcus asked. Malik's hands tightened on the witness stand rail. "He said, I was just another black kid with no future. He asked where my father was, not because he needed information, but because he wanted to humiliate me. He assumed my father was absent, that I came from broken family, that I didn't matter enough to protect." How did that make you feel? Angry, scared, but also determined, because he wasn't just attacking me. He was attacking every kid from neighborhoods like mine who's ever tried to make a difference. He was saying we don't deserve to be heard, don't deserve justice, don't deserve clean air to breathe. Whitmore's defense attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Carolyn Reed, approached for cross-examination. She smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Rivers, isn't it true that you were attempting to bring unauthorized electronic equipment into a federal building?" "It was authorized. I called security 3 times to explain what I was bringing." "But you didn't have official permits for your monitoring devices, correct? You placed them throughout the city without government approval?" "They were in public spaces with community permission, and they weren't illegal. They were documenting illegal pollution." "But you're not a licensed environmental professional, are you? You're a teenager with homemade equipment. Isn't it possible your data was simply wrong, and that's why officials were skeptical?" Malik met her eyes steadily. "My data has been verified by EPA analysts using professional equipment. The patterns I documented have held up under rigorous scientific review. And if my equipment was so amateur, why did Senator Whitmore work so hard to suppress it?" The courtroom stirred with suppressed reaction. Reed's smile tightened. "Mr. Rivers, you've received significant media attention and benefits from this case. Full scholarship to MIT, speaking engagements, a fellowship named after you. Isn't it possible you've exaggerated your claims to maintain that attention?" "No," Malik said flatly. "I documented what I found. I didn't ask for attention. I asked for clean air for my community. If exposing corruption made me famous, that's a side effect, not a motivation." Reed pressed for another 20 minutes, trying to paint Malik as attention-seeking or unreliable, but every attack bounced off documented evidence and verified research. Finally, she gave up, and Malik was excused. As he stepped down from the witness stand, he locked eyes with Senator Whitmore, the man who'd tried to bury his research, who'd corrupted judges and pressured EPA officials, who'd poisoned communities for profit. He looked old and defeated and small. Not a powerful politician anymore, just a frightened man watching his world collapse. Malik felt no satisfaction in that, just exhaustion and hope that maybe this would be enough to prevent the next Senator Whitmore from trying the same schemes. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts: corruption, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, violating environmental protection laws, civil rights violations. Whitmore showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but his wife in the gallery sobbed openly. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a black woman named Paulette Morrison, who'd built her reputation on holding powerful people accountable, was not merciful. "Senator Whitmore, you held a position of profound public trust and betrayed it in the most cynical way imaginable. You didn't just accept bribes. You facilitated the poisoning of vulnerable communities for personal gain. You corrupted the justice system to protect polluters. And when a teenager tried to expose what you'd done, your first instinct was to crush him rather than confront your crimes." Judge Morrison's voice was ice. "The damage you've caused is incalculable. Children breathing poison, families devastated by preventable illness, a community's faith in government destroyed. No prison sentence can repair that harm, but it can send a message that corruption has consequences." She sentenced him to 14 years in federal prison, no eligibility for parole until serving at least 10. The courtroom erupted, reporters rushing to file stories, Whitmore's family in tears, justice advocates hugging each other with tearful relief. Malik sat very still, feeling something heavy and twisted finally release its grip on his chest. It wasn't closure exactly. Too much damage had been done for neat endings, but it was accountability. Proof that sometimes the system could be forced to work the way it was supposed to. Outside the courthouse, Marcus held an impromptu press conference with Malik standing beside him. Cameras flashed, microphones bristled, reporters shouted questions over each other. "Today, justice was served," Marcus said, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Senator Whitmore will spend years in prison for betraying the public trust. But this case was never just about one corrupt politician. It was about exposing a system that allowed environmental racism to flourish, that prioritized profit over people, that thought communities of color could be poisoned with impunity." He placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "My son started this by refusing to accept that injustice was inevitable, by building tools that documented truth, by standing up when powerful people tried to silence him. That kind of courage, that refusal to accept that suffering is normal, that's what changes systems. Not politicians or prosecutors, but ordinary people who demand better and back up their demands with evidence that can't be ignored." A reporter called out, "Mr. Rivers, what's next for you?" Malik stepped forward, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm going back to MIT to continue developing monitoring technology that communities can use to document environmental violations. We're expanding the network to 20 cities by the end of the year, and we're training hundreds of community advocates to do what I did: collect data, demand accountability, and refuse to let their neighborhoods be sacrifice zones for corporate profits." "Do you have a message for other young people watching this?" Malik thought about little Marcus wanting to be a scientist, about kids in his neighborhood drawing pictures of clean air, about every teenager who'd ever been told they were too young or too powerless to matter. Document the truth, build the evidence, and when systems try to silence you, call for help. Find the people who'll stand with you. No one changes the world alone. We do it together by refusing to accept that injustice is the price of being powerless. He met the cameras directly. "You're not too young to matter. Your voice counts. Your work counts. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The press conference ended, and Malik found himself surrounded by community members who'd made the trip to witness Whitmore's sentencing. Mrs. Fletcher hugged him so tight he couldn't breathe. Councilmember Patterson promised continued funding for the monitoring network. Dr. Shamik. Reese told him EPA was implementing his methodologies nationwide as standard protocol. And through it all, his father and grandmother stood close, anchoring him to the knowledge that he was loved independent of any accomplishment, any recognition, any measure of success the world might offer. That evening, they returned to D.C. and gathered at his grandmother's house for a dinner that felt like celebration and mourning and relief all mixed together. Evelyn cooked enough food for 20 people, despite only 5 being present: Malik, Marcus, Dr. Chen, Captain Williams, who'd become an unlikely friend, and Councilmember Patterson. They ate and talked and laughed, the conversation flowing between serious discussion of policy changes and silly stories that had nothing to do with justice or corruption. "What happens to the communities now?" Dr. Chen asked over dessert. "Whitmore's in prison, the facilities are under stricter oversight, but the structural poverty that made them vulnerable in the first place. That hasn't changed. No, it hasn't, Patterson agreed. That's the next fight. Environmental justice is inseparable from economic justice. We can give people clean air, but if they still can't afford health care, or education, or housing, we've only solved part of the problem. That's going to take generations, Marcus said quietly, but it's work worth doing. And now we have proof it's possible, that communities can organize, document injustice, and force systems to respond. Malik listened to them plan, feeling the weight of future battles he'd be part of for the rest of his life. This wasn't an ending. It was barely even a beginning. But it was progress, real and measurable, and built on foundations strong enough to support continued growth. Later, after everyone had left, Malik sat with his father and grandmother in the quiet living room. His father would return to Washington in the morning to handle the dozens of other cases demanding his attention. Malik would go back to MIT to finish his freshman year and continue developing technology that could scale his work nationally. And his grandmother would keep working night shifts at the hospital, as she'd done for years, holding together a family that had learned to span distance without breaking. "I'm proud of both of you," Evelyn said, looking between her grandson and son-in-law. "Marcus, you finally figured out how to be present, and Malik, you learned how to accept help without seeing it as weakness. That's growth worth celebrating." "Graham," Malik said softly, "thank you for everything, for raising me when Dad couldn't, for believing in me when I was just a kid with a crazy idea, for—" "Hush," she interrupted, but her eyes were bright with tears. "You don't thank family for love. That's just what we do." Marcus reached across the space between them, took both their hands. "I wasted so many years thinking sacrifice meant absence. That serving justice required abandoning the people I loved. I was wrong. Real justice starts at home, with being present for the people who need you. Everything else flows from that foundation." They sat together in the lamplight, three people bound by blood and battle and love that had survived absence and returned stronger. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, except for the distant hum of the monitoring station, technology born from anger and hope, measuring air that children could finally breathe safely. Malik thought about the journey from that first failed measurement to federal prosecutions and national reform. How a teenager's refusal to accept poisoned air as inevitable had cascaded into systemic change. How one phone call to a father who'd seemed unreachable had transformed both their lives. How courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, to ask for help when drowning, to believe that justice was possible even when every system insisted it wasn't. The story wasn't over. Environmental racism persisted in thousands of communities nationwide. Corporate polluters would find new ways to evade accountability. The structural inequalities that made some neighborhoods sacrifice zones remained deeply embedded in American policy. But now there was proof that change was possible, documentation that couldn't be dismissed, a network of trained advocates in dozens of cities, technology that gave communities power to see what was being done to them, and a generation of young people who'd watched Malik Rivers stand up to corruption and win, learning that their voices mattered, their evidence mattered, their refusal to accept injustice mattered. That was the real victory, not one senator's prison sentence or one judge's suspension, but the transformation of what people believed was possible. The expansion of imagination around who got to demand justice and whose suffering counted as worth addressing. "What are you thinking about?" his father asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "How nothing ends," Malik said. "We won this battle, but the war continues. Environmental racism, economic inequality, systems designed to protect power instead of people, that's all still there." "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. Malik smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. "We keep fighting. We document the truth. We build the evidence. We train the next generation of advocates, and we refuse to let anyone convince us that injustice is inevitable." "That's my boy," Evelyn said, squeezing his hand. "That's exactly right." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, coating the neighborhood in white that would be dirty gray by morning, but for now transformed everything into something clean and possible. The monitoring station continued its work, sensors measuring particulate matter and ozone and volatile organic compounds,
documenting the slow improvement won through courage and evidence and the refusal of one teenager to accept that poison was the price of being poor. Malik Rivers would return to MIT and spend the next 4 years learning to fight more effectively. He'd develop monitoring technologies deployed in 47 cities. He'd testify before Congress 17 times. He'd train hundreds of community advocates and write papers that reshaped environmental justice policy nationwide. He'd graduate with honors and turn down lucrative corporate offers to start a nonprofit that gave communities tools to document and fight environmental racism. His father would serve another 8 years as Attorney General, using the precedent of the Whitmore prosecution to dismantle corruption networks in 6 other states. He'd be present for Malik's graduation, would attend his wedding someday, would become the grandfather he'd failed to be a father for, and repair the damage through presence and love and stubbornness. His grandmother would retire from the hospital and spend her final years surrounded by communities she'd served for decades, watching her neighborhood transform from a sacrifice zone into a place where children could breathe freely, her legacy written in every life her grandson had touched and changed. But all of that was future and possibility. Tonight was present and real and enough. A family reunited, a community breathing easier, a system forced to acknowledge that even its most powerless members deserved protection. Malik closed his eyes and made a silent promise to the kids in his neighborhood, to Mrs. Fletcher's grandson, to every child who'd ever been told their suffering didn't matter. He promised to keep fighting, to keep building, to keep refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. He promised to use every advantage he'd gained, education, connections, platforms, to amplify voices that systems tried to silence. He promised to remember that justice wasn't a destination, but a practice. Not a victory, but a commitment. Not an ending, but a beginning that stretched forward into every day that followed. And in that moment, sitting between his father and grandmother in the home that had raised him, Malik Rivers felt something settle deep in his chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but purpose. The kind of bone-deep certainty that his life would be spent fighting for communities that systems forgot, documenting truths that power tried to hide, and proving over and over that ordinary people armed with evidence and courage could force extraordinary change. The monitoring station hummed in the darkness. The neighborhood breathed. And somewhere in America, another teenager was building a device to document the poison in their air, learning from Malik's example that evidence mattered, that courage mattered, that refusing to accept injustice was the first step toward transformation. The work would continue. The fight would never truly end, but tonight, in this moment, there was peace and love, and the knowledge that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, justice actually won. That was enough. That was everything.